Good morning, everyone. My name is Alexandre Girard-Muscagori. I'm the Deputy Director of the Research Department at the National Institute of Art History. And I'm really delighted to open this study day on behalf of Anne-Solène Roland, the General Director of INHA. So this event is organized by the INHA in partnership with the CRAL, EHESS, the IXA Research Center at Université Paris 1 Panthéon-Sorbonne, the Swedish Institute, and the Réunion des Musées Nationaux Grand Palais. And it echoes, as you all know, the remarkable exhibition currently on view at the Galerie Nationale of the RMN Grand Palais, dedicated to Hilma of Klint, approached in particular through the lens of gender utopias and sexualities, and curated by Pascal Rousseau. And this study is also the first event of a new INHA research program entitled Objets minoritaires, led by Damien Delille, maître de conférence à Université Lumière Lyon 2 and conseiller scientifique since September 2025 at INHA. And this program is organized and led with the support of two doctoral researchers, Elora Vel-Angerer and Ariane Serk. Ariane Serk, whose doctoral research focuses on women textile artists in Sweden at the turn of the 20th century. And Ariane has played also a crucial role in organizing this study day alongside Damien and Pascal Rousseau. So for those who may not be familiar with the INHA, our institute is both an academic and cultural campus, hosting one of the largest art history libraries in the world, and a research center welcoming each year French and international art historians working across all fields of the discipline. And within the Department of Studies and Research, a team of around 10 scientific advisors and coordinators develop ambitious, innovative projects such as those led by Damien in close collaboration with academic, heritage and cultural institutions through seminars, symposiums, publications and exhibitions. So I will let Damien further elaborate on the aims of the Objets minoritaires project, but I'd like to briefly recall its ambition to explore the interactions between the visual arts, the performing arts and audiovisual productions through the study of expressions emerging from sexual and gender minorities in the modern and contemporary periods. So the Hilma of Klint study day thus resonates fully with the project. One of its strands examines how artists have formed communities through collective artistic practices and the creation of utopian spaces in which homosexualities could find a place, and through affiliations with spiritualist thought. So Damien's project also builds on questions already present at the INHA through research programs devoted, for instance, to 18th century feminist art criticism, some special issues of the journal Perspective, and the residency in 2024 of the FAR Collective on Women Artist Networks. I would like also to take this opportunity to inform you that an upcoming issue of Perspective will be devoted to queer lenses in art history, and that the call for papers is open until June 15. And finally, I would like to warmly thank all of those who made this day possible, Pascal Rousseau, Damien Delille and Ariane Serk, the teams at the RMN Grand Palais, in particular Inès Maillot, who are hosting us today, and the Cultural Events Department at the INHA, in particular Mathilde Desbois de la Roche, Alix Bazier, Claire van der Gott, Zoé Trabis Oyarzabal, for organizing this meeting, as well as the Swedish Institute for its support. And I wish you all an excellent day and very fruitful discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexander. I'm going to switch in French just to introduce this study day with Pascal. And of course, we can, during the whole day, embrace both the languages, I would say, mainly in English because most of the communication or most of the title and the interventions are in English, but it's important also to keep a bit of a French side. So I would like to say a few words about the introduction of this study day in French. Like Alexander said, nous avons co-organisé donc cette journée d'études avec donc Pascal Rousseau et Ariane Serk, qui est donc doctorante et qui travaille avec moi sur le projet Objets minoritaires et qui va intervenir cet après-midi en lien direct avec l'exposition, et Pascal en dira quelques mots justement d'introduction en rapport avec cette journée. La journée d'études, comme nous l'avons indiqué, se veut à la fois ouverte aux différentes pistes qui ont été explorées pour l'exposition, mais aussi veut justement aborder cette question des utopies de genre et des sexualités, d'où le titre, bien entendu, Sexualité au cœur de ce qui va nous animer aujourd'hui durant les différentes communications. Le point important, c'est aussi, et ce qui nous a paru évidemment essentiel à valoriser, c'est la découverte de nombreux points biographiques dans l'œuvre de Hilma af Klint qui permettent en quelque sorte de redécouvrir, de réinterpréter un certain nombre d'œuvres qui, par le passé, ont justement connu toute l'importance que l'on connaît actuellement en rapport avec toute cette histoire de l'art abstrait, et nous y reviendrons. L'idée était de revenir précisément sur ces rapports entre spiritualité et sexualité lesbienne et de reconsidérer les différentes personnes qui ont abordé ces questions, les différents biographes qui récemment ont abordé ces questions et ont permis de renouveler, je dirais, on pourra le dire, en tout cas aujourd'hui, l'approche du travail d'Hilma af Klint. Dans ce cadre-là, justement, cette journée s'inscrit dans le projet que je porte depuis quelques mois, que je suis arrivé depuis en septembre dernier à l'INHA, pour un projet de 4 ans. Et ce projet, donc, intitulé Objets minoritaires, performances, images et artefacts, je ne sais plus dans quel sens, des fois je me trompe, c'est artefacts et images des minorités sexuelles et de genre. Ce projet de recherche, justement, engage l'histoire de l'art sur cette piste, en tout cas sur ces réflexions portant sur les minorités sexuelles et de genre, les communautés, mais aussi les individus LGBTQIA+, et puis plus globalement, différents axes sur lesquels je voudrais revenir quelques instants pour vous présenter justement ce projet et pour introduire en quelque sorte la journée d'études qui s'y inscrit. Ce projet, donc, comme l'a indiqué Alexandre, porte sur les interactions entre différentes pratiques artistiques, et c'est aussi un des points importants, je crois, de cette journée et aussi de l'exposition, que de voir Hilma af Klint, peintre, dessinatrice, mais aussi justement engagée dans des productions textiles qui étaient peut-être un peu moins ou peu connues par le passé. Et donc, de ce point de vue-là, l'idée de cette journée, c'est d'embrasser justement différentes pratiques artistiques, différentes disciplines, qu'il s'agisse des arts visuels, du théâtre, de la performance ou de l'audiovisuel, pour engager justement une réflexion sur ces interactions, ces intermédialités qui sont au cœur des différentes pratiques des communautés et des individus LGBT. Donc un programme, on l'espère, on le souhaite en tout cas, très interdisciplinaire du point de vue justement de ces objets, de ces méthodes et des différentes techniques et médiums qui sont envisagés durant ce programme, mais aussi, je dirais, un objectif premier qui est celui justement de l'INHA, que de fédérer en fait différents chercheurs, chercheuses en histoire de l'art, en sciences humaines, et puis plus globalement différents chercheuses et chercheurs qui viennent aussi des mondes militants, des mondes associatifs, associés justement aux différentes la communauté LGBT en France et à l'étranger, et à cela à la fois le monde académique et le monde des musées, puisque c'est une des objectifs, ou du moins des éléments premiers de l'INHA, que de fédérer justement en son sein ces deux mondes qui discutent beaucoup, se côtoient souvent, et puis des fois prennent des chemins, on va dire, séparés sur certains projets. La fédération donc de ces différents chercheuses et chercheurs, et puis donc ces différents moments historiques que je vais évoquer avec vous dans un instant, permettent de replacer justement l'œuvre de Hilma af Klint et cette journée dans l'étude historique des communautés utopiques, des communautés à la fois politiques et sexuelles, on va le voir aujourd'hui, qui s'inscrivent dans, je ne vais pas vous détailler tous les axes du projet, mais en tout cas dans l'axe 2 de ce projet que je mène avec au sein de l'INHA. De revenir justement sur ce passage du XXe siècle, des artistes et des écrivains qui vont faire communauté face précisément à un contexte de discrimination, à un contexte compliqué en quelque sorte, très compliqué même, tout simplement, de conditions d'être homosexuel dans différents pays, en particulier en Europe, et on le verra aujourd'hui notamment en rapport avec la Suède. Et dans ce contexte-là, d'engager une réflexion sur ces ces pratiques artistiques collectives qui s'intéressent précisément à ces espaces utopiques, espaces spirituels, et c'est tout l'enjeu aussi, je crois, de l'œuvre d'Hilma Klint que de s'engager dans des espaces autres, des espaces qui touchent bien entendu à des pensées spiritualistes et occultes comme la théosophie et l'anthroposophie. Nous y reviendrons aujourd'hui. L'autre point important qui était au cœur de cette réflexion, c'est aussi ces rencontres scientifiques qui en fait ont marqué l'histoire. Alors peut-être qu'on peut avancer sur le PowerPoint par rapport à les quelques images que j'avais prévues qui... Oui, d'accord. C'est introduction. Ouais. Ouais. Je pense que ça va être long, apparemment. Ça y est, ça arrive. Donc le seul chose de cette introduction de ce matin qui me permettait justement de revenir aussi sur des activités passées que nous avons pu avoir, et je laisse la parole tout de suite à Pascal qui va justement revenir sur ces différentes pistes qui ont été au cœur, l'image 2, donc le projet objet minoritaire dont je parlais à l'instant, et puis donc tout de suite ces autres activités scientifiques qui s'inscrivent dans un temps long, qui est celui justement d'une réflexion sur ces rapports entre pratiques artistiques du passage du XXe siècle et de l'entre-deux-guerres et pratiques à la fois spiritualistes mais aussi lien avec le genre et la sexualité. Pascal.
Thank you for coming, all of us, some from far. Thank you for coming from Göteborg, from Berlin, Stockholm. It's a great pleasure to be there and to share that study day. It reminds me, and Kurt Almquist reminds me also, a similar event. It was 13 years ago. It was in Stockholm, and it was connected with the seminal and large historical retrospective tour organized by the Modernité and curated by Iris Weston-Müller. It was a fantastic day. And Kurt remind me today that I decided for my lecture, because it was a conference day like that one. I decided to change the title of my lecture. It was first titled Ultravision, Androgyny, Abstraction, and something like this, and I decided to change into Subliminal Vagina. And I remember also the fresh, if not quasi cold, reception of that change. It was a surprise for the public, but it was also a fresh reception. So time has changed, and time has changed because we have new materials, a lot of scholars, and we are here with a lot of them, contributed to extended the perspective on the formalist, more formalist first approach of the innovation of Hilma Klint. And thanks to the biography by Julia Voss too, she introduced new biographical aspect of Hilma Klint's life, and it was necessary because it's evident, and the exhibition want to also to focus on that aspect, that eroticism, spiritual sexuality, Maria Sexualis, and all that connection between spirituality and eroticism was very present in the work of Hilma Klint. So it was 13 years ago, and time has changed. In Hilma Klint, you know that time is very important. The good moment, the good place. So I think that find Paris is a good place, it's a good moment to reconsider with new perspective and feminist and sexual perspective the work by Hilma of Klint. Thank you for all of us to come and to participate, and I'm looking forward to sharing all the news perspective on that aspect.
So I was going to introduce you this thing that we organized a few years ago, and I think it's important to connect, of course, with all the different moments that led us to today, to the Hilma Klint Study Day. And indeed, we wanted to also mention that part of the work that we made for years, talking about the intermediary, and in this first study day in 2014, you actually introduced Hilma of Klint with this communication on Hilma of Klint, gender and eroticism. In fact, I don't know exactly. I don't remember exactly the title of the yes in the communication, but it was part of the different, I would say, insights and different moment that we wanted to develop, especially I wanted to say about these two study days connected to one of the things that I've been working for a long time, this question of androgyny. And I wanted just to mention this book, my book about androgyny, and the fact that I had a small part of Hilma of Klint in my doctorate PhD a long time ago, I would say. I defended my PhD in 2015, but in fact I never did anything. And after I saw all the different work that has been made, and especially the new discovery about Hilma of Klint, and I realized that in fact maybe my text wasn't good enough for all the different discoveries that have been made for the past recent years. I wanted to again mention this idea, at least this frame or this context of androgyny, due to the fact that Hilma of Klint explored these themes, these iconographic themes, and I think it's important to also connect, like I mentioned with the first study day, the work of Piet Mondrian, who's been also exploring these aspects of the key, I would say, theme of the turn of the 19th to 20th century, the theme of the evolution and the androgynous evolution that has been explored by a lot of artists among with Hilma of Klint and others. So just to finish with that, I wanted to also mention this specific piece of work made by Hilma herself. That is actually the choice that we made to illustrate the program. And in fact, and I think Julia Voss will talk about this work, it was at the same time a choice that we made, but in fact it was really something like maybe an intuition that we had, connecting this painting to what Hilma mentioned in her books and a note, saying that in fact the two people could be her and one of her colleague. In fact, just to mention precisely, Gusten Andersen and herself as a man. So here, just with this image, with the introduction of this program, we have all the different aspects that we are going to, I would say, explore during this study day. At the same time, the question of gender, sexuality, and of course, intimacy, but also the presence of artists in Sweden that are also connected to different groups, spiritual groups, such as the Theosophy, the Anthroposophy, but also other smaller groups that are going to be important to understand this question. So the abstraction, the androgynous abstraction of figures, of male and female figures, developed here by Hilma of Klint or by other artists, is important for us to have in mind, not only Hilma, but also the context that where Hilma belongs, and where we can connect her to this situation. I wanted to finish with the thanks, but you already did a lot, and also thanks. Thank you a lot to to the NHA. You mentioned all the different key persons that has been here for us to present and to organize and to settle this study day. And I also wanted to thank my directress, Anne-Solène Roland, who's been also who accepted the idea of this study day just after few months, after the beginning of my program. And I'm very happy to see that it's been here since the beginning. I would say when we talked about this study day in connection to the symposium when I started the program. So I'm happy to see that it's one of the first study day that we have today that is almost launching, I would say, the program Objet minoritaire. So I said I switched from French to English. So I'm going to say thank you to all of you and have a good study day. Yes, I think you could start with the first session. I'm just going to introduce the first session, reconsidering the biography, spirituality and sexuality, lesbian sexuality, with the first session that has been presided by Charlotte Fouché-Zarmagnan. I'm going to say a few words about Charlotte. Charlotte is also here as the director of the Centre de Recherche sur les Arts et le Langage at EHESS. EHESS and the CRAL is one of the partnership, that's the partner that we have for this study day. And I'm happy to see that she accepted to preside this first session. And a few words about her work. Charlotte Fouché focuses on research on women, artists, model, art critics, art historian, museum curators, theorists in the art world, mainly from the 18th to the 21st century, but focusing mainly on the 19th and 20th century. And she examined both the contribution of women to art history and the contribution of art history to women, like I said in your presentation. And we know pretty well each other because we've been doing our PhD almost together a few years ago, I would say. So thank you, and with Pascal, of course. I forgot to say the main thing under the supervision of Pascal. So thank you, Charlotte, for this first session, and I start with the study day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Damien and Pascal and Alexandre. Je voudrais d'abord vous remercier effectivement de m'avoir convié à présider cette matinée et évidemment aussi dire combien le CRAL est très heureux, le Centre de recherche sur les arts et le langage auquel j'appartiens à l'EHESS est très heureux d'avoir été associé à l'organisation de cette journée. Donc la session de ce matin porte ce titre, Reconsidérer la biographie, spiritualité et sexualité lesbienne. Avant de présenter nos trois intervenants qui parleront, je le précise, en anglais, j'aimerais partir d'une ambivalence au sujet du biographique qui sera peut-être reprise dans ces trois communications. Alors que l'attention au biographique est véritablement, pourrait-on dire, la marque des femmes, il n'y a pas vraiment de possibilité pour les femmes de séparer la femme de l'artiste, alors qu'on se pose la question pour l'homme. Le spiritualisme peut devenir une voie de dépassement de ce biographique en assumant une neutralisation de l'auteur par le recours à l'anonymat, ou encore en désindividualisant l'octorialité pour la rendre plus collective et collaborative. Au prisme notamment des études queer, qui offrent des alternatives pour penser autrement les vies, c'est bien de cette fluidité du biographique dont il sera question ce matin. Et qui mieux que vous, Julia Voss, pour amorcer cette réflexion sur le biographique, vous qui avez publié d'abord en allemand la biographie d'Hilma af Klint en 2019, une biographie qui a depuis été traduite en anglais en 2020, publiée à l'University of Chicago Press. Julia Voss est historienne de l'art et historienne des sciences. Elle est également écrivaine et critique d'art et collabore à la Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. Depuis 2021, vous vous êtes chargé de recherche au sein de la direction du musée historique allemand de Berlin. Vous êtes également professeur honoraire à l'Institut de philosophie et d'histoire de l'art de l'université Leuphana de Lunebourg. Vous avez publié sur la philologie allemande, sur l'histoire de l'art et la philosophie à Fribourg, à Londres et à Berlin. Et vous avez travaillé sur des sujets très différents, dont le point commun reste l'articulation entre les arts et les sciences. Votre intervention porte ce titre « J'étais l'instrument de l'extase, genre, espace et temps dans l'œuvre et les mots d'Hilma af Klint. I was the instrument of ecstasy, gender, space and time in Hilma af Klint's works and words. Dear Julia, you have the floor and it is a pleasure to hear you on this morning.
So thank you to all again. Thank you to Ariane Serk and thank you to Pascal Rousseau for inviting me, and thank you for the entire program. It's an honor and pleasure to be here. In the forthcoming half hour, I would like to do two things. On the one hand, I will speak about the fluidity of the categories of gender, space, and time in Hilma af Klint's works, very much based on the biography I've written, and the recent book I've co-authored with Daniel Birnbaum, and I think he will speak on Sunday, if I'm rightly informed, on Kandinsky and Hilma af Klint. And secondly, I would like to raise some questions in the end, questions about the traditions that might be inscribed in Hilma af Klint's work and that are worth exploring. So let's go. Hilma af Klint was 45 years old when a peculiar figure emerged on her canvas. The man is naked, except for a cap loosely perched on his head. He recalls a heroic figure from antiquity with a muscular body and a compact build. Only his skin doesn't correspond with his overall appearance. It is light and translucent, comparable to a spirit's. He is wearing a Phrygian cap, often associated with the Roman cult around the sun god Mithras, and later on, of course, with the French revolutionaries. The man seems to be falling backward, struggling to catch himself. With one arm, he is balancing a tall vessel from which smoke plumes are billowing, while the other arm is outstretched, grasping as he slides down the painting into an orbit of sublime pink. Af Klint was also fighting for her inner balance. Her private life was far from settled, her art even less so, and the two were interconnected. It was a dark December in 1907, the sun having shone only for a few hours. A year prior, a painting frenzy had engulfed her. Winter, spring, summer, fall, each season came and went. The way she had been painting and her subject matter had alienated some of her older women friends, and the long-standing group of female friends called the Five was about to unravel. All of this came at a time when Af Klint needed her friends and community more than ever. The Falling Man belonged to a series which the artist comments on in her notebooks. The series title was The Large Figure Paintings, and Hilma af Klint had started working on it in May 1907. It was part of the monumental cycle later called Paintings for the Temple, and the Large Figure Paintings was the third series, consisting of 10 paintings, of which I'm showing 5 here. And I'm starting with number 6, which is also the prominent picture of this day. From one picture to the other, the sexes unite. A fusion Af Klint explores across multiple pictorial levels. In number 6, and that's the first on this slide, the female and male principle unite in a literal sexual sense. Both men and women are naked. The woman sits on the man's lap, a cross rises from their shared center, and the sexual intercourse is mirrored by 2 bright circles flanking the couple. They contain the island and hook, ancient symbols for the female and male principle, called yoni and lingam in tantric terms. They are also reminiscent of stylized sex organs. And don't some of the objects hovering over Af Klint's falling man resemble female and male genitalia, ovaries, spermatic ducts, a uterus? Is that? No. Well, I guess you can see it here. The notebooks accompanying the series contained a warning. These paintings were to be, quote, kept out of sight of other people. The sexual metaphors and depictions stand in a long line of thoughts and sketches over many notebooks in the Hilma of Klint archive. The erotic and sexual energy had increased step by step in the early 1900s. I was the instrument of ecstasy, af Klint had noted in January 1906, the year her giant project, The Paintings for the Temple, had started. The eyelid was hooked into by the hook, she noted on September 1907, while working on the large figure paintings. Finally, about 3 months later, in December 1907, she went into a detailed comment on number 6 of the large figure paintings and wrote, "The man's face on the following picture should express desire without sensuality. The man's image is me, Gusten, the woman. Upward-seeking feelings are interpreted in the picture. The essence of my life was Spartan truth versus Gusten's Spartan love." There are a lot of opposites coming together here: desire versus sensuality, man and woman, truth versus love, and finally the Spartan truth and Spartan love. Spartan in this context seems to be a code. According to Plutarch, homosexuality among women in ancient Sparta was widely accepted and practiced. Spartan refers to that practice. Gusten, the woman referred to, named Magdalena Augusta Andersson, left her own notebooks, which are preserved in the Hilma af Klint's Foundation's archive. Her account of the relationship with af Klint took a literary turn. Starting in 1905, Gusten dedicated fairy tale-like stories to Hilma af Klint. One story's title read, "The Tale of the Mountain King," dedicated by Gusten Andersen to Hilma af Klint. This tale is full of desire, devotion, and admiration on the one side. On the other side, it is also fueled by the fear of rejection and loss, like in this passage. "Do not think," and that comes from the Mountain King, "do not think that you can enter the Mountain King by the power of your own will alone. His gate is closed to intrusion, but the doors of the great mountain open wide to those who know the right time and the right word to reach the Mountain King's heart. If you would like to know the secret of finding this, you shall ask the little flower at the foot of the mountain. She knows what is that opens the doors to the mountain's halls." Severe setbacks were processed poetically by Gusten. In June 1906, she composed The Tale of the Broken Soul. The intimate relationship between Gusten and Hilma af Klint recovered. A year later, Gusten Andersson's presence was instrumental for the series The Large Figure Paintings. Af Klint writes on September 1907, "Gusten then had to stay in my study for 7 days to prepare it with her prayers." It was Gusten Andersson who was able to grant the mental support, the energy, the spirit that was needed. Shortly after, af Klint was working on 2 series. Simultaneously, that October, the format of her work expanded into something enormous. The next cycle consisted of 10 paintings, each measuring more than 10 feet in height, the size of barn doors. The artist gave these works the title The 10 Largest, and the paintings were dedicated to different stages of development or evolution, from childhood to adolescence, adult age, and old age. Those 2 I'm showing belong to childhood and adult age. It's number one and number 7 of the 10 largest. Many of the paintings that af Klint produced are what we would label abstract today, non-objective, without any discernible relationship to the physical world. It is these paintings that caused one of the most famous stories of modernism to fall apart, namely the master narrative of Western abstraction and its discovery by male artists around 1910. Nevertheless, it is important to note that in many of af Klint's works, figurative and abstract elements are entwined. Abstraction is just one of her many painterly possibilities. It is no theological path, no fetish, no one-way street. And like with all great works of art, each painting has multiple layers of meaning. They might be portals to spiritual worlds, they map the invisible, they seek to find what's behind the forces of matter, and at the same time, they also contain references to her personal journey and situation, and I will continue to explore the latter. The whirling circles of roses and lilies, for example, on the first picture of the 10 largest, are symbols of the artist and Gusten Anderson. Af Klint had portrayed Gusten Anderson before, wearing a long dress and a veil, sitting with a lily in her hand. The rose and the lily refer to the conquest of the pain of duality, a comment in the notebook says, and the coming together of rose and lily signify completeness. An explanation which was given in connection with the command that Hilma and Gusten develop the flowers within themselves, Hilma the rose, her friend the lily. The compositum, Yet the rest of flowers in number 1 of the 10 largest also touch another circle in the painting. It contains the letters A and V, the initials of Vestala's Kate, another union, another dual being brought into life with another woman. The compositum Vestala's Kate can be found on many canvases, and I'm showing here the 2 examples from the 10 largest in detail, and one more from the series Primordial Chaos, number 9, and number 1 of the Eros series. Like the rose and the lily, Vestal and Asked are 2 principles of one duality. Hilma af Klint is part of it, together with Anna Cassel, her closest friend, collaborator, sister in spirit, comrade in arms, and fellow artists for decades. They both had studied together and went to the Art Academy in Stockholm in the 1880s. Vestala's Kate was their union, their merging of 2 alter egos, one belonging to Hilma af Klint, the other one to Anna Cassel. Anna's female alter ego was called Vestal, like the Roman priestesses who guarded the fire in the temple of the goddess of Vesta. Hilma af Klint was her male counterpart, Asked, a reference to the practice of asceticism aimed at cleansing the body and creating an inner state in which the divine can be received. Thus, the friends embodied 2 sides of the temple idea, its inner and outer form. What's more, the words Vestal and Asked flanked the shell of a snail, an hermaphrodite in zoological terms, an animal which possesses both sexes, male and female. There's a lot to say about this intriguing creature, and I just leave it here by stating the snail is a leitmotif in Hilma af Klint's work, and you can see it everywhere in the exhibition. Showing more examples here, details from Primordial Chaos from the 10 largest and the US series of 1913. And as I said, the examples are countless. And of course, frequent symbols are also, and we have seen it before, the eyelet and the hook. And I hope you can see it. It's above and below the snail in white. As well as the color scheme blue and yellow. Blue for the female principle, yellow for the male principle, and they result in green, of course, if mixed. The rose and the lily, like the Asked and the Vestal, the snail, the eyelet and the hook, blue and yellow, are free entities shifting back and forth from the spiritual to the physical planes as divine symbols, avatars, alter egos, or embodiments of the male and the female. They cross gender boundaries, create hermaphrodites, and joyfully smash the idea of 2 separate sexes. They give birth to a queer universe, and we will hear more about it. But what created harmonic vibrations on the canvas could cause dissonance and resentment outside of it. While af Klint was working on 2 series simultaneously, the large figure paintings and the 10 largest, in 1907, her long-term relationship with Anna Cassel became troubled. She noted, and I'm showing here the last of the large figure paintings, Anna was of no help during that time, November 1907. The conflict escalated when af Klint suggested to the group of female friends to perform a ceremony to mark the completion of the large figure paintings in 1907 on Christmas Eve. Af Klint proposed a vision in which she saw herself and Gusten Andersson on two chaises, one blue and one yellow, like the female and male principals. They were holding hands and would be led to the altar, to the altar of the five, depicted as the last of the large figure paintings. But nothing came out of the plan. Af Klint wrote, "This ceremony was never completed due to the reluctance of the others." 1907. At the Christmas meeting, af Klint felt isolated, deserted, and lost. The crisis lasted for months. When the artist edited the notebooks many years later, and many of the early notebooks are transcriptions from the late 1920s, she had still not forgotten how miserable she had felt. It had been, she wrote, terribly difficult. In a margin note, looking back to the horrible times, she stated, "Without the work, I would probably have succumbed." Again, this was not the end of the story. Better times crossed the horizon. One of the most vibrant accounts of a relationship with af Klint is also kept in the Hilma af Klint's Foundation archive. It was Sigrid Landsén, 10 years younger than af Klint, who left in a notebook what she remembered of the year 1913. Landsén worked as an athletics instructor. She shared the flat with Hilma af Klint and her mother in Stockholm since 1904, and she writes, H, for Hilma, slept by me for a while on the morning of July 25, kissed me incessantly. Later in July, I was surrounded by Hilma's arms, feeling an endless love so that we could die together. And it goes on like this. And af Klint kept the notebook and added her loving comment later. It read, "You, number 8, were surely the one who inspired the US series." And I'm showing you here number 1 of the US series with this dancing figure in the center, which could well be the athletic instructor Sigrid Landsén. The setting looks like a stage, and the notebook also reveals Sigrid Landsén and af Klint went together to the movies. Please note the male and female figure, the blue and yellow, the snail structure, and the chakras. And if you wonder about where the number 8 comes from, this is also from a notebook. And the numbers here refer to different women in the circle of female friends around Hilma af Klint, and it's a new group that built up after the 5, so dissolved. First, it was 12 women, and you might see some familiar names here. Number 1 is Gusten, number 2 is Hilma, number 3 is Anna Kassel, and number 8 is Sigrid Landsén. The names are referenced by numbers and elements. Eventually, a 13th member was added, namely Thomasine Andersson, a nurse capable of writing in very elaborate German who would become af Klint's lifelong lover, friend, comrade in arms, and collaborator on later botanical projects. The transgression of gender boundaries is clearly a lifelong theme in af Klint's work. It is, at the same time, no thought experiment, no mere theory, but a lived experience. Furthermore, it is part of a spirituality which understood the world as ongoing evolution, as growth and interconnectedness. In af Klint's universe, everything changes, moves and flows with shapes and colors, buzzing, floating, fertilizing, mating, oscillating, flipping, gliding, and growing. Gender was one category that was shook up by this ever-moving spirit. Time and space were others, and all was interconnected. Asket and Vestal, for example, were not just roles the pair took in the present. They also saw them as vessels of past lives, of previous incarnations. An artist called Lotten Rönnqvist was said to have been a priest in Syria in one of her previous incarnations. when Asked ruled as king of the land. You L. for Lotten Rönnqvist, and she was also a member of the circle of women friends. You, Lotten Rönnqvist, were a priest in Syria at the same time when the Asked was king of the land. Thus, Asked was not only an alter ego of Hilma af Klint and a contemporary, he was also a historical figure. Being historical and contemporary at the same time is clearly at odds with chronology. But in af Klint's and her friends' universe, it made perfect sense. Time ceased to be understood as a line with a beginning and an end. And there are the voices who would speak to Hilma af Klint throughout her life. Where did they come from? What space could they be assigned to? How could they cut through space and time? Af Klint described the voices as the originators of her artistic vision. And here's a quote: "Amaliel offered me the work, and I immediately said yes. This became the great work which I have accomplished in my life." January 1906. The voices also continued to be a source of confirmation and joy. And one day they applauded when, after the 10 largest and the large figure paintings were done, they said, "You've now completed such glorious work that you would fall to your knees if you understood it." April 1908. These voices had no bodies and no addresses and no birth dates. They were free-floating in time and space. Yet they had names, some of which are cited in this beautiful colored sketch by Hilma af Klint, executed in 1934. And I don't know whether you can read it, but all these shapes have names attached, which are Gregor, Georg, Amaliel, and Ananda, and those are also spirit names of the voices that speak, and I noted down in the notebooks, but there are also more. In the last couple of minutes, I would like to conclude with some questions, and to do so, I think it is necessary to pull Hilma af Klint a little bit back on earth. In order to do so, I have brought 2 documents from the Hilma af Klint archive. One that has never been shown, I think. It is the cover of a women's magazine kept by Hilma af Klint in her archive, showing 2 artists. Prince Eugen, member of the Swedish royal family, but also an artist and famous patron, founder of the museum Waldemars Udde, and the painter Hanna Pauli, also Swedish, from a middle-class Jewish family. The magazine from 1933 was published on the occasion of a joint exhibition of Hanna Pauli and Prince Eugen. We don't know why af Klint kept it, what triggered her interest, but we do know that Pauli and her were contemporaries studying at the same time at the Stockholm Arts Academy. They knew each other. The other document I've brought is a sketch Hilma af Klint did while traveling in Italy, probably in the year 1903. It shows the church of San Lorenzo in Florence in a view taken from the window of her hotel room. And unfortunately, I was just recently in Florence and the hotel is being rebuilt, so the original room has vanished now. Af Klint went on a grand tour through Italy together with Anna Kassel and was full of praise for Renaissance art. Why do I show these pictures? Because I think it is important to remember that the wonderful and the supernatural were part of Klint's experience, but this did not make her discount the world she lived in. She sourced information from art, contemporary and older, in Sweden and abroad, from science, from biology, from religion. She was a member of the Theosophical and Anthroposophical Society, and I'm sure we come back to this, and at least for a while of the Swedish Women's Artists Association. She was able to reconcile the spiritual and the profane without feeling any contradiction or being thrown off course. In one moment, she could speak to Ananda, her spiritual friend and companion, named after Buddha's favorite student, and in the next moment, she would catch the tram to the harbor on time to board the ferry to the island of Munsö. She also dealt with topics other artists had dealt with before, coming from classical or ancient literature. Some of her classical references have come up in my talk. Eros, for example, the god of love, Mithras, the Roman sun god, Vesta, the ancient goddess, the Spartans, and the Askid. The topic of gender transformation is also a classical one. In Ovid's Metamorphoses, Book 3, the prophet Tiresias is transformed into a woman after striking and separating two mating snakes. After living as a woman for 7 years, he finds the same snakes, strikes them again, and is transformed back into a man. And I just leave it here. I'm intrigued by the snakes on Klint's painting in this context, and the snakes are also a very recurrent theme. I'm also intrigued by the fact that Anna Kassel called her grand series, executed in 1913, the Saga of the Rose. And I'm showing here the wonderful volume of her collected works, of course edited by Kurt Almquist and Daniel Birnbaum. Is the Saga of the Rose a quote? Was she referencing the legendary Romance of the Rose? It was this book that sparked the first major debate in Western Christianity on the nature and role of women. This debate from the early 15th century is remembered as the famous Querelle de Femmes, or the woman question. And one of the most active participants in this debate was, of course, Christine de Pizan, the fabulous French-Italian author. Pizan counts as the first professional women writer in Western history, and she too worked with gender transformation. In an allegorical poem, Pizan describes herself being physically transformed into a man, referencing Ovid's Metamorphoses. I leave it here as a reminder not to underestimate the scope, the depth, and the ambition of these collaborating artists and women. Hilma af Klint dreamt about building a temple, and she called it also a museum to show what lies behind the forces of matter. Let me close with the Ceterum Censeo. Ceterum Censeo, furthermore, I think the temple must be built. Thanks a lot.
Patrick Stehorn est un historien de l'art suédois, directeur du musée d'art de Göteborg Kunstmuseum, depuis 2020. Patrick, vous avez étudié l'histoire de l'art à l'école du Louvre à Paris, ici. Voilà. So you speak French?
Oui, oui.
Et à l'université de Stockholm, vous avez obtenu votre doctorat en histoire de l'art en 2006 à l'université de Stockholm, avec une thèse de doctorat assez pionnière sur le champ des masculinités dans la culture visuelle suédoise entre 1900 et 1915. C'est une thèse que vous avez soutenue donc en 2006. Donc c'est vrai que ce champ des masculinités était encore peu défriché. Depuis, vous avez travaillé sur de nombreux sujets portant sur l'art nordique, la culture visuelle et la mode au tournant du XXe siècle. Vous avez dirigé la Tilska Gallery, qui est un musée entièrement consacré à la mode, je crois. Et votre intervention à l'art de la fin du 19e, passage du 19e au 20e siècle. Très bien. Votre intervention porte aujourd'hui sur les vies et les visions queer dans l'art d'Hilma af Klint. Alors, elle s'intitule « Relations intimes, croyances spirituelles et peinture expérimentale. Vie et vision queer dans l'art d'Hilma af Klint. Intimate relationships, spiritual belief and experimental painting. Queer lives and visions in Hilma af Klint arts ». Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you so much for this introduction and for the invitation to this event. It's really a big honor to be here, to be part of this day, and following Dr. Julia Voss. Your work has really opened up a lot in the field of Hilma af Klint, so I'm very grateful for this, as well as Kurt Almquist. Editing the Catalogue Raisonné together with Daniel Birnbaum, which these two foundations would say opened up the field of Hilma af Klint for further studies. So I'm very grateful for that. And there might be some images that you recognize now during the day, but I hope you will bear with me. What I will talk about today is the queer perspective on a few motifs by Hilma of Klint, but also to set it a little bit within the Nordic art history at the period. So Nordic art history looks somewhat different from a queer perspective. The period around the turn of the 20th century coincides with the time when the concept of homosexuality was introduced and established in the Nordic countries. And just as art gradually opened up to embody artists' subjective perspectives, experiences from a life outside of the norm were also part of creating the Nordic modernity. A queer art history needs to introduce some new names, artists who lived and created outside of the heteronormative framework and who have not been included in Nordic art historical narratives. But it's also about new ways of looking at already established artists. A closer understanding of their emotional lives and social networks opens up possibilities for adding new layers of interpretation to their artistic works. Hilma of Klint has previously been recognized primarily as one of the pioneers of modern art. I argue that her experiences of a life outside of the hetero norm contributed to her experimental creation. In her art, Hilma af Klint was able to draw on insights from spiritual worlds and experiences from her close relationships with other women to create a multi-layered experimental visual world. The queer perspective is thus not merely about the creator's sexuality and identity, but about connecting art with personal life and social development. Although queer experiences have often been excluded from historical narratives, they have never been outside of the spirit of times, the changing of times. On the contrary, they have helped to identify, shape, and foresee possibilities for living and creating with room for personal freedom in a modern society. There was relatively good access to art education for women in the Nordic countries during the latter part of the 19th century. A large number of women interested in a professional career sought admission to the academies and preparatory programs. Among these, there are many examples of women who lived together in long-term partnerships. The modern meaning of the term friendship is not always sufficient to interpret these relationships. Here, the spectrum ranges from practical arrangements regarding cohabitation through close friendship and romantic friendships to deep loving relationships with or without sensual and erotic encounters. Around the turn of the century, there were a few well-known examples of female artists from the Nordic countries who lived together as couples, such as the Swedish artist Janna Bauk and the Danish artist Berta Wegman, who lived together in Paris for a longer period. We see them together here. The painting to the left is one of the most loved paintings in Sweden. Often regarded as interpreted as a painting of a woman artist finding freedom in Paris, artistic freedom, but it could of course also be the look of a woman in love looking at the artist as part of a partnership, a more strict one to the right. Here we have the Danish artists Marie Luplau and Emily Munt. They were very involved in the women's rights movement, and in the image on the down left, you can see Emily Munt painting an artist and a child. So this is her painting of Marie Luplau with her palette and brushes, and they together adopted a child that they raised together in their home. And behind them we see a man playing the piano, which is Emily Munt's father, who who had lost his wife. So they were kind of a queer family before avant la lettre, on peut dire. And not least, the Norwegian experimental photographers. These photographs were discovered only in the 1980s, so of course they weren't well known at the turn of the century. But their experimental way to represent themselves with the means of photography still rests very innovative and very avant-garde when we see them today. Yep. Oh, sorry, I had missed one out. The motifs often tell of the artists. This is just to mention a few of these female couples and the women artists inspired by the relations to other women. But these motifs often tell something of the artists' relationships, but also in their ways of depicting modern life, where there was room for new ways of organizing everyday life in close partnerships between women. This was also evident in Hilma af Klint's immediate circle. Lotten Rönnqvist, that we just heard mentioned, attended the Academy of Fine Arts in Stockholm at the same time as Klint. There, Rönnqvist also met the artist Alma Arnell, and these two spent the rest of their lives together. After leaving the Academy, Rönnqvist, Arnell, and Klint had studios next to each other in the Academy's studio building in central Stockholm. Their artistic practice created a space where it was possible for women to live and work together in close relationships. The spiritual movements at the time served a similar purpose in creating spaces for women to organize around shared interests. Theosophy was open to female leadership from an early stage in a way that was unusual in society at large at this time, and the international movement included several prominent women's rights activists in leading positions. Women made up a large portion of the active members in the spiritual movements in Sweden as well. And we know that Hilma af Klint participated in several of these groups that consisted exclusively of women. Where she also established her own groups where the spiritual practices helped create a close-knit community and an emotional intimacy. There was thus a tradition in which female artists lived in close relationships with other women, which was not entirely uncommon in Nordic artistic circles at the turn of the 20th century. During her studies, Hilma af Klint developed a close relationship with Anna Kassel, who was also a student at the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Stockholm. They created together and both explored the spiritual through art. The relationship with Kassel took on a special role within Klint's visual world, which we saw a deep example of here, where Kassel assumed the role of the chaste Vestal Virgin, while Klint referred to herself as the ascetic, the one who abstains. The spiritual quest, the artistic exploration, and the close emotional bonds with women were interwoven as a creative inspiration for Hilma af Klint. Throughout Klint's artistic career, there is always another woman whose presence is integral to her artistic creation in various ways, and who also participates in the spiritual quest. There was Anna Kassel, and then Gusten that we heard about, Sigrid Lassén, and in the final decades, Thomasin Andersson, and probably there were also more. They also developed collective working methods and contributed to one another's creative work within these circles, which in itself can be a way of creating an alternative community in relation to the majority culture. But it is also about the significance of these intimate bonds for the creation of Klint's visual world. Within these relationships, a free conception of gender, partnership, and intimate encounters beyond the binary was practiced, a concept also embodied in the artworks. Going closer in to look at what we can interpret as queer themes in the oeuvre of Klint, I would like to begin with this work, painting number 1 in group 8 from 1913. Here, it's a spiritual encounter between male and female principles which is depicted. A slender figure with androgynous features and no visible genitals stands before a white cross with an oval of blue and yellow color fields. Half of the body is yellow, the other half is blue, and the halves of the body are mirrored by figures in the same colors floating above. As we already heard, in Klint's symbolic universe, yellow represents the masculine principle and blue the feminine. Although the color codes can sometimes be interchanged, they can also merge into a shade of green. The central figure holds a seashell above their head and is also enveloped in the sweeping contour of the shell's form. And the shells of this spiral shape are carried by a certain type of snails, which held a special significance for Klint and her circle of friends, since the snail was considered hermaphroditic, possessing both male and female reproductive organs. The spiral-shaped shell was perceived as a symbol of the dual being that combined the characteristics of the sexes in new and unexpected ways. The painting embodies contemporary notions of androgyny as a primal state, which found its roots, among other places, in theosophy, but also in classical philosophy. Challenging a strict gender division was also to challenge one of the foundations of bourgeois morality, which during the 19th century had established a rational way of thinking and a public climate perceived as increasingly restrained and conservative. Within the framework of spiritual art, it was possible to explore new ideas about gender. But this painting is also rooted in the personal life. As we also saw, according to the notes in the notebooks, this painting was very apparently inspired by Sigrid Lassén and their intimate relationship, and the notes how they kissed early in the morning. So this contributes to a clear example of how the content of Klint's painting is not merely a response to her dialogues with the spirit world or with the artistic movements, but also in relation to her personal experiences. However, my aim here is not to let the biographical interpretation take precedence, but rather to weave the personal experience together with artistic and other inspirational impulses. The Vestal and the Ascetic are two recurring roles in the series Primordial Chaos and Eros. And as we already heard, according to the note, the Vestal refers to Anna Kassel and the Ascetic to Hilma af Klint. Klint saw herself assuming the male role, and in these motifs, the meeting between the yellow and the blue is explored against a warm green background. The snails emerging from their shells allow their feelers to meet in a sensual way. The snail bodies seem to be refined into winding forms that can resemble sperms or tentacles or glands. In this series, in these paintings, we see how the forms twist together, stretch out into openings, or form figures reminiscent of ovaries or penises. They seem to be in constant motion and in a mode of becoming. As they wind out or float about, they appear to seek one another out and occasionally unite in unpredictable ways. The dissolved formal language in these drawings and watercolors stems partially from the spirit writings that Klint and her circles had previously engaged in, and also forms the basis for her more abstract motifs painted later on. The understanding of the humankind that Klint and her circle developed was partly rooted in theosophy, but also on classical philosophy, holds that all people are essentially dual beings, possessing both masculine and feminine traits. The modern world had created a division between the masculine and the feminine, which theosophical teachings could seek to help to reconcile. To stimulate individual maturity and evolution with the aim of achieving an integration between the masculine and the feminine. This aligns well with ideas in modern sexology around the turn of the 20th century. Among others, the German sexologist Magnus Hirschfeld spoke of homosexuals as individuals in whom masculine and feminine characteristics and physical traits are blended. Hilma of Klint also seeks to move beyond binary gender language. For example, when she speaks of how hooks and eyes are designed to interlock regardless of gender, beyond the descriptions of gender. So we can recognize the softly curved forms that permeate all of her visual world. Yes. The rose and the lily is another motif that appear in several paintings, but perhaps especially in the 10 greatest. In this case, it is said to be rooted in her relationship with Gusten Andersson, where Hilma was the rose and Gusten was the lily. Throughout the series, the plants dissolve, the petals, pistils, stamens, and bracts, spreading out into an infinite universe, seemingly searching for new ways to meet and join together in new unpredictable constellations, patterns, and formations. An image like this can remind us that these representations are not merely spiritual, abstract, or aesthetic. Here it is as if the flower petals have formed and combined with shapes that also remember bodily parts. Glands, fallopian tubes, vas deferens, testicles. In Hilma of Klint's work, the sensual take on an anatomical form that adds the physical to the spiritual and aesthetic dimensions of creation. The style and artistic language that Hilma of Klint develops are experimental and modern in several ways. It explores the methods and tools of aesthetics and incorporates and embodies important currents of the thoughts of the time. But it is also innovative in the way an artistic style is used to explore and embody identity. This search for identity is not immediately apparent in the artworks. Rather, the artist has developed a consistent style that makes it possible to depict experience from a life outside of the heterosexual norm without being explicit or revealing them immediately. Like this painting, which brings together fragments and details from different parts of Klint's visual world into one single field, as an image of an open, fluid, and multifaceted consciousness. Viewing the paintings becomes a kind of initiation into their layers of meaning and content. This corresponds to an ambivalent relationship to the public sphere that is not uncommon among minority groups, wanting to be seen and to take up space, yet at the same time doing so on one's own terms. Through her paintings, Hilma af Klint creates a vision rooted in the spiritual, the personal, and the erotic that makes room for queer life. It has long had to remain hidden, but can now be presented to the world and be seen in its own right. Thank you.
Jadranka Ryle, so gender and botany in Hilma af Klint watercolors. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Okay, yes, thanks. So thank you for the introduction. I would like also to thank the organizers of the exhibition and the organizing committee of this study day. I'm very happy to speak today here. And I'm particularly happy to speak about Hilma af Klint here in Paris, since it is actually where I first encountered her work. It was in 2008 when several of her paintings were shown at an exhibition in Centre Pompidou. Exhibition was Traces du Sacré, and there was a few of her works there, which I actually never saw before. And at the same time, there was an exhibition in Swedish Cultural Center, Hilma af Klint und modernité relevée. So that was a few years before the major retrospective in Stockholm in 2013, which drew the attention of the wider audience. So as we know, later she became this global phenomenon, and her exhibitions toured around major European cities and both North and South America. And since then, many scholars have explored her work from different perspectives, and we heard some very interesting research today already. But I will talk today about her abstract watercolor series, which was created during the last 20 years of her life. They are somehow quieter and softer compared to more widely discussed larger paintings, which are shown here at the exhibition. So there hasn't been very many research published on these series. However, they're also gaining more interest. Last year, they were included in the exhibition Hilma af Klint, What Stands Behind Flowers at MoMA in New York, which highlighted these watercolors together with her other botanical drawings. So in 2022, Hilma completed a series called On Viewing of Flowers and Trees, which consists of 69 images made using wet-on-wet watercolor technique. And 2 years later, she also did another series, Studies of Colors on Munso. I will also look into these two series to show how Klint understood nature as a living, interconnected organism, where everything is linked through a kind of flowing etheric energy. In wet-on-wet method, as the name suggests, wet paint is applied on a wet medium, which results in the colors spilling, turning, dripping upon and disarraying the image surface, which gives the finished image the impression of perpetual movement. This was also a preferred method of Rudolf Steiner, the founder of anthroposophy. So this kind of lack of critical response to these paintings is possibly in part due to these works' very elusive and interpretation-resistant nature. Af Klint's diary writings from this time also do not translate simply into interpretational framework, since her diary entries are often structured as descriptive meditations, and they often resemble difficult and invasive thought experiments. Nevertheless, they help discern certain themes which occupied her thoughts at this time. So elemental spirits, invisible forces and processes in nature, islands, colors and issues of gender are the main motifs in the notebooks from this time. From her 1922 notebook, which she titles Invisible Forces on Nature Spirits, it is possible to understand that af Klint experiences natural processes as powerful and sometimes playful acts of so-called elemental spirits. There are gnomes, which are earth spirits, undine, water spirits, sylphs, air spirits, and salamanders, which are fire spirits. She understands these mythical beings as dynamic forces behind the ephemeral natural cycles that shift in an ever-moving flow, and she believes that careful observations of the natural world led to the perception of these otherwise invisible beings. She also seeks to link these meditations on invisible life forces to the issue of gender. In her notebook, description of plants are gendered. She writes that there are specifically male, specifically female, and also neutral plants. And she understands this by humbly listening to the nature spirits. Klint ties her understanding of gender to the natural world through her vision of the concealed spiritual reality of botany. Understanding of the nature of this relation requires reference to her interconnected meditations on ecology, elemental spirits, cosmology, and the idea of fluidity. To understand the connection of these ideas, I consider feminist idea of fluidity as philosophical concept, as well as embodied materiality, specifically in the work of Lucy Irigaray. For Irigaray, fluidity has a capacity for disruption of and the confusion of boundaries between apparently binary possibilities of being, I quote, reconfined within solid walls of principle and spreading to infinity. So prefiguring these feminist discourses, Klint disrupts and blurs the boundaries of form in her fluid expression of the invisible flux of matter in her watercolors. At the center of Hilma af Klint's idea and art is the theme of liquidity and flow, especially in this series. These concepts carry many meanings. It can refer to flow of energy, etheric body, bodily fluids, primordial water, and island landscapes. It is also central to her understanding of gender relations. In her writing at this late period in her work, she is actually, I think, a little bit less concerned with androgynous unity of the gender, which she explored more in her earlier work, and more with the relation between man and a woman, which she describes as cooperative and fluid exchange. She writes, thus the power flowed between man and woman, and she saw the two bodies as being continuously connected through this ongoing flow. And this exchange happens in a twofold movement, so from above and from below. Of Klint's written records of her meditations envisage gendered life forces, and the watercolor aesthetics she develops in the final 2 decades of her painting seek to explore and experiment with these intersecting gendered forces. A study from this series, which consists of 2 flowing planes of colors, red and blue. And the wave-like border between them is vague, and at the point of contact, both colors are changed, and the clear separation of the 2 planes is disturbed. The colors blend and change each other into a reddish-purple shade of different intensities. The image is like a captured still moment of a movement, which seems powerful both in an imposing and gentle way, as the seismic movement of 2 liquid color planes, or a soft, misty evaporation. This watercolor can be seen as depicting the flows of power and exchange between the sexes that her diary notes express. But as the title of the series suggests, it is on the viewing of flowers and trees. It is also an expression of her own perception of natural forms. The unstable and somewhat unpredictable results of the wet-on-wet technique gave Klint the means to express the unstable and unpredictable nature of the plant world as she understands it. In her meditative narration, Klint writes on mystical penetration into the nature. She writes, first I will try to penetrate the flowers of the earth, then body of water, then blue ether, then forests and mosses, and so on. So she uses the word penetrate, which is a charged term in the history of ecology. To penetrate nature is a Baconian concept which has extraction as a goal to control the nature. Of Klint's position here is more nuanced than that. Her contemplative penetration into the elements of the natural world is balanced by humble listening. This indicates that of Klint has in mind a merging and connecting on a deeper level, a desire to understand it from the inside rather than forceful and one-sided exploitation. This aesthetics is penetrating in the sense of being with nature, as Patrick Harry would express it. It is not an ordinary viewing of the physical sight, but an insight from an insider rendered into abstract and fluid impressions of the invisible flux of life forces which lie behind natural processes. She writes that the etheric energy of wilting flowers seep into the soil, dissolve, and earth absorbs it like fine drops. It's very saturated with images and watery references. And developing this idea and seeking to link its esoteric theology to emergent scientific knowledge, af Klint goes on to describe the invisible life forces of plants as a kind of electricity or magnetism which flows, again, in twofold movements. So this twofold movement, upwards and downwards, corresponds also to the movement of energy flows between sexes and to the formal organization of the watery planes in the painting that we saw. The colors seep into each other, and the medium, water, flows both upwards and downwards simultaneously. This movement goes in both directions and highlights the relationship of exchange, of codependence, of cooperation in opposition to exploitation, which was growing concern in nascent modernist industrialization. So, considering of Klint's long interest in nature, which was something consistent throughout her whole career, her whole every kind of aspect of her creation, and her concerns about the alienation from nature, which was caused by modernist science, ecofeminism provides a useful and effective frame for the analysis of Klint's work from this period. For example, Caroline Merchant emphasized the irreversible consequences of continuing environmental exploitation. And she emphasizes also the necessity to develop an ecological ethics which emphasize interconnectedness between people and nature. She also claims that both male and female elements which are important to maintain environmental integrity. So Klint's formulations in her esoteric exploration of fluid invisible life processes is a kind of proto-ecological ethics of interconnectedness, which Merchant suggests as a goal of ecofeminism. The vital fluid of the etheric life force connects living beings with non-living nature, and visually this invisible life force is captured in af Klint's watercolors as fluid and abstract. It should be also recognized that the relation between the water and the botanical world that af Klint explores in this series is in part borrowed from Rudolf Steiner's thought on the etheric body. She attended his lectures throughout the 1920s, where he developed this idea that the etheric body is something that is common to all living creatures. The etheric body in Steiner's lectures were a conception of life that corresponded with the element of water. This truth, Steiner states, was revealed to the clairvoyants by spiritual beings from the ancient sagas. He writes, "And so in those ancient times, man knew that within him the universe is reborn in varied forms. He experienced an inner world. Out of his inner vital fluid, the whole universe arose as an etheric structure." So, offering another version of the myth of primordial egg, Steiner further claims that plants participate in a spirit that infuses all of nature as well as humans. These ideas are rooted in the late 19th century biocentric currents, from which af Klint also borrows, but she also innovates a new conceptually oriented aesthetics. The development of materialistic science at the end of 19th century, discoveries of X-rays, changes in atomic science and radiation, changed the perspective of human place in the world. In the context of these new discoveries, which are also relating to evolution, it was necessary to rethink the human relation to other animals. Neo-vitalism, for example, was a widely spread movement among scientists and philosophers alike. And although it is a polarized term in itself, it can be summarized, according to Ted Benton, as the belief that forces, properties, powers, or principles which are neither physical nor chemical are at work in or are possessed by living organisms. Af Klint's involvement with vitalism is best reflected in her interest in the panoply of natural life forms and their common participation in the flow of ethereal spirit. She also follows Ernst Haeckel, for example, and his interest in richness of natural life forms and their common participation in the flows of ethereal spirit. And just as in vitalism, for af Klint, animal, vegetable, mineral seem to defy physical boundaries and merge into one another in a quest for the universal principle of life. Sarah Lynn Henry claims that the difference between more romantic figurative nature paintings and of early 20th century and 20th century artistic modernism was precisely in this, the permission, so to speak, that the artist had to actually penetrate nature and indeed to structure and restructure it. So to turn to a visual example, skip that one. Describing green algae, af Klint writes, "The nature of green algae is the love of freedom. It does not want to bind the ether body to the body." In the watercolor entitled Green Algae, af Klint paints a double spiral in blue and yellow, which occupies most of the image. The aquatic organism's refusal to solidify and materialize is expressed by the breakdown of the green into its formative colors. It is at the same time green and non-green, in suspended dialectical flowing between yellow and blue. Now, in af Klint's visual language, we heard already today yellow and blue were coded as male and female, respectively. And moving away from the romantic representation of the visible nature and shifting from Steiner's thought by putting greater emphasis of gendered fluidity, af Klint turns the gendered color spiral into a vitalistically charged fluid abstraction. Another example of how af Klint links the idea of vital fluid with femininity can be seen in one of her much earlier works that depicts primordial chaos. In this image, water gives birth to the universe. Spiraling organic forms rise out of the water and transform as they develop. The image suggests the idea of primordial soup, a rich, life-giving liquid that nourishes all living things, much like Undine, the elemental water spirits, who nurture, and I quote from af Klint, from the vital substance. Most commonly, this fertile fluid is also anthropomorphized as feminine. Af Klint's late watercolors are also a key for differentiating her work from her contemporary romantic representations of nature. In another example, yellow and blue, a male and female for af Klint, spill and mix into an abstracted form which seem to resemble the cartographic image of an archipelago. Coming from a long line of naval officers and cartographers, Hilma's material existence from an early age was connected to the water. In a different manner, her continuous physical closeness to the large bodies of water throughout her life also played a significant role for her work. From an early age, af Klint spent long periods of time with her family on Adolso, an island in the Lake Mälaren. Living in Stockholm also meant spending most of the time in close proximity to the water. And later in life, the long stays on the island of Munso, where she had a studio built by Anna Kassel in 1917, were instrumental for a series of watercolors from 1924. Sorry, that's the image of the studio with the series of this work on the walls. And in 1924, she completed serious studies of colors on Munso. Tying them to the geographical location of Klint suggests a deeper connection between the island and the images, but also her own connectedness to the place and the colors found in its nature. It is tempting to read the recurrent isolated forms surrounded by color in these watercolors also as islands surrounded by bodies of water, directly drawing from her own embodied relation to the sea. They seem visually tied to the viewing of flowers and trees by the use of the same method, same style, same colors, and formal arrangements, connecting this series to the watery contexts of the island surroundings as well. These images of the islands developed from her more figurative landscapes, actually seascapes. They are mostly calm studies of mist, waves, and light around. They're mostly created around 1900, and they reveal her early interest in the solution of form through water as both subject and medium. In a later work, Cool in His Corner, where she actually spent some time with Thomasina Andersson. So it's likely painted later when they spent one winter there. The liquidity of the medium mirrors the fluidity of the motif, and it anticipates kind of these later abstractions. Through this focus on water shifting, non-solid patterns of Klint's landscapes trace a progression from figuration towards abstraction, where boundaries between medium and subject, sea and the sky, begin to dissolve. Water being both subject and medium is in early modernism, according to David Clark, had a big role in development of abstraction. In her abstract work, her legacy and romantic connection to geographical location are connected in a fluid and organic images. Yet, if there is a connection with her heritage, there is also a break from it. This fluid aesthetics is far from cartographic precision, nor does it reflect romantic representation of nature. Instead, it is an organic meditation on the invisible fluid auras with privately color-coded and gendered nature. She also writes, "The waves which upset the surface of the source, each time they rise, they enhance some of the light, so that eventually the water becomes so light and fourfold within you, so harmonious that it shimmers like gold." Shimmering flows of water, which seem to materialize at the same time on the outside and within the artist, in the elusive, ever-changing waves, imply their coexistence as part of the etheric flow, contained in both the artist and nature beyond. And to move a bit forward towards feminine fluidity, I will examine one more image for the end. The color blue has an important place in Klint's visual language. It is connected to feminine, evoking the movements of the waves by its images of advancing and retiring. And she writes, "The woman's power goes in the direction of blue, as the image shows. As she searches for the new areas of soul life, then she sees the swirling." A visual parallel of this text can be seen in this blue monochrome watercolor, which, in a singular wave, evokes the blue depths of the sea and swirling movements of the currents. Looking at the Klint's blue watercolor, one has the impression of being submerged in water into its color, or at the same time, the color pouring itself out. Ethereal blue is here a watery agent, which seems to prefigure what will much later be described by Lucy Rigaret. She writes, Color pours itself out, stretches itself, escapes itself, imposes itself upon me as a recall of what is most archaic in me, the fluid. Likewise, of Klint's thalassographic blue fluid, a gentle yet powerful life force in flux, erodes the boundaries of anthroposophical ether and romantic seascape. In a wider environmental feminism, in which life itself is always indebted to the waters that flow through us and comprise us, Astrida Neymanis reads these flows beyond humanism and anthropocentrism. She writes, "From watery womb to watery world, we are all bodies of water." Of Klint's feminine blue watercolor bears in its depths a powerful expression of the ethereal fluid and the life-giving force of the primordial waters. Seeking for the invisible vital fluids of nature beyond the human, of Klint's life forces are expressed fluidity. In a method which produces watery, irregular, abstract patterns of ethereal blues, and which refute or soften solidity. With the abstract feminized depiction of invisible ethereal forces, of Klint expresses embeddedness in watery nature, mutual connectedness and exchange. Thank you.
Jovana is a research associate at the University of Belgrade, Faculty Philosophy of Art History, focusing on symbolism, late 19th century art connected to gender approach. So we are expecting your talk. Thank you, Jovana.
Thank you very much. Bonjour and hello, dear colleagues. So, as you know, my name is Jovana Nikolic, and I have been researching the work of Hilma af Klint for several years, while symbolism has been one of my broader research interests for even longer. I'm also especially interested in women artists and the way question of female identity and experience appear in art at the end of 19th and the beginning of the 20th century. What should I do now? Different buttons, sorry. So in my presentation, I would like to propose the idea that the work of Hilma af Klint, although abstract and created in the early 20th century, essentially belongs to the symbolist circle of ideas. I believe that many of the key themes of European symbolism from the second half of the 19th century continue in her work, only expressed through a different visual language. In other words, the visual language changes from mythological and allegorical figuration, typical of earlier symbolism, to abstraction, but the central questions and ideas remain very similar. What connects the symbolist artists of the 19th century with some artists of the early 20th century is, above all, a specific view of the world and the human existence. Symbolists believed that material reality was only one part of existence and that beyond it there was a higher spiritual reality that usually remained inaccessible to many people. This is why they were interested in dreams, intuition, spirituality, occultism, and theosophy. They believed that art could become a way through which human beings might sense truths that cannot be understood through reason or senses. From this perspective, Hilma af Klint very naturally belongs to the symbolist way of thinking. She also believed in existence of higher spheres of being, the spiritual evolution of humanity, and in possibility that art could transmit messages coming from beyond visible reality. The main difference lies in a visual language. While earlier symbolists expressed such ideas through mythological and religious narratives, Hilma af Klint gradually abandoned figuration and turned toward abstraction, using color, geometry, and symbol signs to represent what cannot be seen directly. One of the important themes that connect European symbolism with the work of Hilma af Klint is so-called woman question. In other words, the direction of art and culture to the emancipation of women at the end of the 19th century. It was precisely during this period that women begin to gain access to education, enter professional life, become more visible in public sphere, and increasingly demand social, economic, and intellectual equality. These changes provoked strong reaction within society, especially among intellectual and artistic circles. This is why symbolist art so often presents images of femme fatale, so sphinx, sirens, or mythological heroines who led men toward destruction. Female sexuality was frequently portrayed as a dangerous force connected to the body, matter, and instinct, in contrast to the male principle, which was associated with reason and spirit. Many symbolists expressed the fear that the dominance of material and the physical could lead to decadence and the collapse of civilization. However, this is exactly where Hilma of Klint introduced an important difference. In her work, the focus is not on a conflict between sexes, but on their reconciliation. The male and female principles do not function as opposing forces, but as mutually dependent energies whose union is essential for the development of life and the evolution of the spirit. So I believe there are at least three important reasons for this way of thinking. First, would be the fact that Hilma of Klint was a woman and that she was very familiar with the experience of living and working in a society that was still deeply patriarchal and quite misogynistic. She belonged to a second generation of women admitted to Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Stockholm. Although women had formally gained access to education, in practice they were still seen as inferior to men and often had to work much harder to achieve professional recognition. In other words, Hilma did not observe the so-called battle of sexes from a distance, but she was herself part of it. And during her life, she tried to find her place with artistic system that often denied women authority and visibility. For this reason, her work does not demonize the female principle in a way we often find in many symbolist artists of her time. This is more connected to a previous presentation, but just a few words. The second reason is her very strong knowledge of nature. Over her lifetime, Hilma of Klint was deeply engaged in the study of plants and animals, worked as illustrator in a veterinary institute of Stockholm, and developed an almost scientific approach to the natural world. This is a very important aspect of her work because it is through the study of nature that Hilma arrives at the idea that life does not survive through conflict, but through connection. In nature, everything is based on interdependence, balance, and cooperation between different principles. New life emerges through union and exchange rather than through the dominance of one element over another. For this reason, the idea of unity between sexes is much more important for Hilma than their opposition. The male and female principles in her work represent two complementary forces whose coming together enables the creation of harmony. So the third and also very important reason is her spirituality, that is the strong influence of theosophy and spiritualism. Hilma of Klint believed that a human being is not only a physical entity, but also possesses a spiritual dimension that transcends sex, matter, body, and physical existence. During her lifetime, she was close to the spiritualist and theosophical circles, participated in seances, practiced automatic drawing, and believed that art could become a means of communication with higher spheres of existence. Together with a group of women known as the Five, she tried to establish contact with the spiritual world and believed that her paintings were created under the guidance of higher forces. For this reason, Hilma of Klint gradually moves away from figuration and turns toward abstraction. For her, the abstraction is not a formal experiment in a modernist sense, but not only that, but an attempt to represent what cannot be seen with the physical eye. As her works develop, natural forms and bodily references gradually disappear and are reduced to geometry, rhythm, color, and symbol. In this way, she attempts to overcome the limitation of the material world. The body and sex become only transitional stages in a broader process of spiritual development. It is very interesting that Hilma represents the male and female principles through a precisely defined system of colors and forms. So the color yellow signifies the male principle, blue is the female, green is the unity and harmony of the two. Spirals, circles, and organic forms also carry symbolic meaning and often represent processes of development, transformation, and spiritual evolution. So these ideas are especially visible in the Swan series, not only, but this one is, I think, the best to explain some things. At the beginning of the cycle, the male and female swans are shown as clearly separated and opposing principles. Their worlds are divided by black and white surfaces, and the sense of duality is strongly emphasized. However, as the series progresses, the relationship between the two principles become increasingly complex. Their forms begin to interweave, the colors start to merge, and the figures gradually lose their physical shape. By the end of the cycle, the swan almost completely disappears as a real, recognizable being, and is transformed into an abstract structure composed of concentric circles and geometric forms. So I believe this is one of the key moments for understanding Hilma's art. The ultimate goal is not the victory of one sex over other, but their transcendence through harmony and unity. So similar ideas appear in other cycles of her work as well, such as evolution, the tree of knowledge, the dove, primordial chaos. Across all these series, there is a shared belief in the existence of a higher spiritual realm in which a cosmic harmony transcends the divisions characteristic of earthly life. For Hilma of Klint, the realm of spirit is a space of harmony, and okay, this is my idea, but you can say later, are you with me? And if there is an earthly equivalent of that harmony on earth, it would be love, but not only romantic love, more as a universal principle of connection and reconciliation. That is why her art does not promote conflict, but rather the cooperation of differences. And I have two conclusions. First one, that the cosmic balance in which Hilma deeply believes cannot be achieved through war of any kind, or domination, or the destruction of the other. It requires peace, agreement, and mutual cooperation. And the second one concerns the very nature of her artistic identity. Hilma of Klint promotes these ideas because she is, in the same time, a theosophist, a symbolist, and also a woman. It is combination of these three experiences that shapes her specific vision of the world. As a symbolist, she believed in the existence of higher spheres and hidden meanings. As theosophist, she believes in the spiritual evolution of humanity. And as a woman, she has a very clear understanding of the consequences of conflict and inequality between sexes. For this reason, her art does not speak only about transcendence and spirituality, but also about possibility of reconciliation. This is one of many important messages her work carries from the past, along with a lesson that remains, I think, relevant for our own time. That would be all. Thank you for your attention.
When I saw your watercolors, the famous wet and wet techniques, it reminds me the iconography of magnetism. You mentioned magnetism, and I think that there is a long archaeology of that imaginary of fluids, inner life, of minerals, vegetables, humans. And if we consider that archaeology of magnetism, mesmerism, we have also the connection with clairvoyance and with somnambulism, but also extension of vision, the possibility to see more, and it's evident in the tree and the plants viewing. When we reconsider that history, we find a lot of experimenters, artists experimenting magnetism, mesmerism, connecting with the experimentation of the fluidity of gender. For example, a colleague of us, Julie Ramos, worked on Théophile Bras. He was a very traditional artist from the beginning of the 19th century, very early in the somnambulist artistic practices. And he was inventing a new gender. He was inventing the yell, the il and the him, her connection because he was collaborating with his wife, and the fusion between both were inventing a new gender. So it's quite interesting to have that connection between all the animal magnetism, which is a part of the imaginary of the fluids, energy from the plants and the minerals and the humans, but also with the gender. So.
Yeah, thank you. I agree, and I think the nature world kind of opened up lots of possibilities for artists because, as we saw earlier, we talked about snails and their hermaphrodites, and there are different structures and different combinations in nature, which I think helped Hilma understand her own ideas, or kind of placed her own ideas, materialized them in this plant world, and also development of the science and kind of discovery of all kinds of things that were invisible before, like magnetic fields or X-rays, kind of gave validity to this kind of thinking. And plants and nature world in general, but specifically plants, I think are something really important throughout the whole of her career. She was a botanical illustrator, as we know, and also, I think all the coil lines and maybe symbolic elements that we looked at before in the morning presentations all have kind of these vegetal forms and floral forms that are so important. And even in her public work, like her children illustrations, she uses a lot of flowery images for kind of decorative purposes. So this is, I think, something that goes through her whole work, both public and private. But I think at the end, when she started actually exploring them in a way that is not presented figuratively, so completely abstracting into these fields of colors, I think it was actually going beyond, going one step further than what she did before, doing exactly kind of finding ways to express her own ideas, perhaps of gender and sexuality, through the images that are completely on a different plane of existence. Yeah.
So some questions?
Thank you so much. These were beautiful talks. I just have a very positivistic yes or no question. And I really loved what you said about water. And I put down so many ways of how you described it, sort of defining the water as the subject and medium. I think it's an ingenious formulation to describe what she's doing. Really excellent. Thank you so much. And you had a lot of quotes in your presentation, beautiful quotes. This is a yes and no question. Are these from the German notebooks from the 1920s?
No, they're written in Swedish.
Okay.
I actually had at the end a slide which had the numbers. I think I didn't show it, but I can let you know exactly from which notebooks they are. I actually had them, in bibliography at the end.
Okay,
but I will happily share where they're from. And water, and I think in general watercolors were the base of lots of modernist experimentation, precisely because the instability of the medium and because it's hard to control the water. So I think artists frequently find freedom in this, and it was quite instrumental for a lot of modernists turn to more abstract images to use precisely watercolors or water as a subject. And here Hilma combines both, which is actually quite interesting for me. Yeah, thank you.
Other question, suggestion? on water, on nature, medium. The medium is a medium. Your question?
I guess it's not necessarily connected to yours, but just general conversation about the nature and, you know, all these esoteric ideas that were very popular at the beginning of the 20th century. And a lot of that kind of later got sadly reintegrated into a lot of, you know, kind of right-wing movements of that period. And there used to be emphasis also on like the racial element of all these esoteric theories. I was curious, going through her work, did you ever like come across anything like that? Did you ever think about it? Or was that kind of not something that she was at all interested in?
Well, I actually think there might have been a couple of problematic moments, but especially if you look at the connection with national romanticism and I don't know, popular thing at the time was light will come to us from the north and things like that. So there were these kind of I think it started maybe off as a pride, but then it took a wrong turn and went into some kind of more extreme ideas, and it was the basis for a lot of fascistic ideas later. And I think at some point she does have I can't quote her now from my head, but she has a couple of statements that can be considered kind of on the edge, but I think she very quickly also comes out of it. So I think it was kind of what was happening in her time around her, and I can't say that she completely, was righteous all the time, but also I think because she was outside of the movement of national romanticism and this kind of national pride that was developing a lot in Sweden of that time, she kind of just goes over to her different spheres. She is less involved, I think, in this kind of political discourses than some other contemporaries. No.
Yes, thank you very much for your presentations. I was wondering, as you opened the lecture of Hilma af Klint through symbolism, what could be a relationship to Art Nouveau and Jugendstil, linked also to nature and decoration? I don't remember which one of you talked about decoration. I think it was you. Nature decoration.
Okay, about symbolism and Art Nouveau, they're not really, I mean, they are kind of connected, but not completely. But let's say about Art Nouveau, there is the same source of inspiration, which is nature, but I believe in a different ways expressed, and maybe that's more your topic, but I don't see, because for Art Nouveau is very, I think all of us have some images, visual images. When they say Art Nouveau, it's mostly similar for a lot of artists, similar forms. And the Hilma's forms are kind of different, I would say. But I don't know, do you have something, to share about her express of nature? Do you think it's similar to Art Nouveau? It's not to me, but maybe that's just my opinion.
Well, I think there is a connection, actually. Maybe not so direct, but on the other hand, Hilma published a few of illustrations in children's magazines, where a lot of Art Nouveau Swedish artists were publishing as well, and that was quite a big trend in illustration, and Hilma was doing that as well. And there's always this kind of decorative frame and flowers around it. They're quite pretty, actually. And in fact, a picture that we saw photo of Hilma of Klint a couple of times now in her studio, sitting down with a wilted flower in a vase on one side, and on the other side there's a kind of an easel, one of those children's illustrations. I wish I could pull it out now, because I think lots of people don't notice it because of Hilma's own posture and dominance. You don't notice that there is actually a very pretty illustration, very orange. It actually, to me, it compares a lot to her images of 10 largest, for the colors and also this kind of decorative element that they have. And again, plants there played a big role, because, we decorate things with flowers, with coiled lines and little details like that. And I think this is also where her public work kind of overlaps with her private larger paintings, like 10 largest specifically, and two very specific children illustrations that are published are, I think, some kind of version of childhood and youth from the 10 largest, but in a more kind of conventional way, if I can say that. Also, I think there is this kind of influence. Maybe it's not so direct and so obvious, but I think this is kind of where these two flows overlap in her work. Yeah.
Je pense qu'on peut faire une petite pause. Elle va être réduite, si vous le voulez bien, donc 5 minutes à peu près, 5 or 8 minutes, and we will continue with the third session of the afternoon. It's okay? 5 or 8 minutes.
Bonjour, je vous propose de recommencer notre dernière session du jour, une session donc que nous avons intitulée donc ésotérisme et homosociabilité artistique, où il s'agira, je crois, de revenir sur un certain nombre de points importants de cette journée, qui sont celles précisément d'Hilma af Klint dans son contexte artistique, historique, de contexte de spiritualité, et surtout de voir comment cet artiste s'inscrit plus globalement dans des rapports collectifs, des rapports de travaux collectifs, des rapports justement principalement de rapports entre femmes, de sororité, et plus globalement de travaux de groupe, mais aussi d'un point de vue justement des différentes associations qu'elle pouvait avoir avec des groupes plus mystiques et ésotérique, de voir comment tout cela va se produire. So I'm just going to switch in English to say that we are going to continue with this dissertation on esotericism and homosociability, artistic homosociability, questioning at the same time the artistic and mystic and esoteric sociability in terms of the groups that Hilma af Klint has been affiliated with, and also with the different group collective work that she's been involved in her career, connecting that to a more broader context within the late 19th century and first part of the 20th century. We're going to start with this session with the communication by Per Swagsnell, professor in history and religions and lecturer in study of religion. You are from the University of Södertörn, yes, in Sweden, and your field of specialization is Western esotericism, new religions, and alternative spiritualities, with a particular emphasis on how current and such current forms are connected to processes of modernization. And you've been doing your doctoral dissertation on satanic feminism, Lucifer and the liberator of woman in 19th century culture, and you are going to present this communication entitled The Transreligious Mysticism of the Edelweiss Society, le mysticisme transreligieux de la société Edelweiss. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me. So, the Edelweiss Society was a spiritualist group formally inaugurated in Stockholm in 1890 and active until around 2004. Famously, of course, it was the context in which Hilma af Klint received her basic schooling in spiritual matters. In what follows, I will give an overview of the group's history, focusing on the role of interreligious or trans-religious ideas and mystical consciousness in its activities. But before the spiritual stuff, let's start with some beer. How come? Well, the Swedish upper-class woman who would become the first leader of the Edelweiss Society was born Huldine Mosander. At the age of 22, Huldine married the Irish landowner Richard Pigott Beamish. He ran the famous Beamish Brewery in Cork, whose rich stout is still one of the region's most popular beers. The marriage, however, was a disaster, and after 15 years, they separated. In the early 1880s, Huldine settled in Stockholm and began spending time with a friend of her mother named Berta Valerius. Valerius led a small spiritualist circle called the Cloverleaf, of which Beamish became a member. Among other things, the circle used a so-called psychograph to communicate with spirits. In April 1884, Beamish was traveling in England when something dramatic happened, according to what she later recounted. She died and was revived through magnetism. This meant, she explained, that the natural human being had died, but the spiritual being lived on. The spiritually transformed Beamish was repulsed by all the unchristian varieties of contemporary occultism she encountered in England, as can be seen in a debate article she published in the UK spiritualist journal Light, under the signature Edelweiss. The name Edelweiss came from her visions, and according to one explanation, the symbolism of the flower referred to how, and I quote, "in the wolf age of blasphemous denial and malicious hatred of Christ, it was the duty of the crusader to endure at his post, like the Edelweiss, which on the mountaintop, with its gaze directed upward, defies the fury of the storm." The following spring, Beamish traveled to Jerusalem at the urging of the spirits. There she became gravely ill, but recovered miraculously. When she attended the Palm Sunday service at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the priest handed her a palm leaf, which would later acquire enormous spiritual significance. She also claimed to have healed the sick using magnetism and white electricity. The latter was a preparation used in electrohomeopathy, an alternative medical treatment of Italian origin. At a séance held at Beamish's summer residence, Ängsholm, in the autumn of 1888, the spirit Iron decreed that a new circle under Edelweiss's leadership should build a temple with a dome supported by Christianity, the Catholic doctrine with its incense, Judaism with its sacrificial offering, the spiritualists with the dove of the Spirit. This meant that the old doctrines were to be merged and then cease to exist, in their present form at least. The general thrust of several Edelweiss texts is one of interreligious liberalism, for example stating that members, quote, may belong to whatever church, whatever sect, whatever religious confession they please, end quote. A later text proclaims that the ancient Indian worldview was exalted and magnificent. It possesses wisdom and pearls of infinite value. This is underestimated by Christianity and has been treated in a stepmotherly fashion. Christianity is the younger child. Do not forget this. Even so, the actual teaching is quite consistently Christocentric. In 1889, Beamish published the book Spiritism in its Proper Light to clarify what she saw as contemporary misunderstandings about communication with the spirit world. At the beginning of 1890, New spirit messages made it clear that the formal inauguration of the Edelweiss Society should take place on April 13. Therefore, 13 wine glasses engraved with Edelweiss flowers were commissioned, one for each member of the group. The number can be assumed to refer to the participants in Christ's Last Supper, the Savior and the 12 disciples. Beamish, dressed in a white gown and holding the palm leaf from Jerusalem in her hand, delivered the opening speech and emphasized the importance of leading a simple life, as well as love and purity. Love was to be completely selfless and not confused with passion, something best avoided through purity. Here we see the same chaste, ascetic, and altruistic tendency that was also prominent in Theosophy, as well as, of course, within the Pentecostal movement and the Church of Sweden. After the speech, specially made Edelweiss brooches of silver were distributed, which members were strictly obliged to always wear visibly. Each brooch contained a piece of the palm leaf from Jerusalem, which the speech explained to possess a wonderful hidden power. The idea, a pamphlet further stated, was that the emblem would lead to joyful recognition whenever members of the society who did not know one another happened to meet. At the time, of course, there were not yet enough members for this to be truly necessary, but hopes for the future were high. Sweet it shall be, the pamphlet proclaims, in distant lands to recognize brothers and sisters through this sign. And here's another slide with the casts for the brooches, which are currently in the collection of mediumistic art in Munich. In the spring of 1890, the society began celebrating communion, drinking wine from the etched Edelweiss glasses, and partaking of a special Edelweiss bread. The radical nature of a group with female leadership doing this must be understood in light of the fact that the first female priests in the Church of Sweden were not ordained until 70 years later in 1960. On Christmas Eve, 1892, Huldine Beamish died, marking the end of the first era in the society's history. Her daughter, who was also named Huldine, grew up on her father's estate in Ireland and had a strained relationship with her mother. She later married a Swedish baron named Fock. It was by no means obvious that the younger Huldine would take over as leader, but this is what happened. Like her mother, she soon began having visions and practiced healing on her children and others, who later said that when she placed her hand on them, it became burning hot. New women now entered the organization, including, of course, its later most famous member, Hilma of Klint, who joined on June 8, 1896. In February 1897, however, of Klint and 4 other women received the message that led to the formation of the breakaway group The Five, and all but one left the Edelweiss Society in 1899. When the Fock family moved to Valhallavägen 108 in 1896, an Edelweiss chapel was established on the first floor. On the altar was the palm leaf from Jerusalem, and the revelations were kept in an iron chest. 30 years later, Fock wrote about how they received spiritual messages through drawings, writings, visions, and hearing. Among the spirits that they were in contact with was the famed warrior king Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden. Attempts to produce materializations of spirits failed, according to Fock, because of disturbing disharmonious currents. And this, of course, somehow connects with the question about race and nationalism. We can get back to that. Anyway, in 1905, Huldine Fock published her book Links in the Chain of Truth. When a new edition of it appeared in 1910, at least 3,000 copies had already been sold. Thus, although the Edelweiss Society was a small group, its ideas were actually fairly widely disseminated. The tone of the book can be described as sentimental and moralistic. Its main theme is explicitly Christian, but many of its ideas differ quite significantly from those found in mainstream Christianity. For example, it claims that Jesus was neither God nor the savior of humanity through his death on the cross. The former belief had probably already been hinted at in the way her mother welcomed her congregation in the name of the Father, the Brother, and the Holy Spirit. In addition, a doctrine of reincarnation is proclaimed. Fock writes, "Death is a gift because it takes us away from here to new classes in the school of development. The same applies as in all institutions of learning. We must work ourselves and cultivate our memory if advancement to a higher class is to take place." This combination of belief in reincarnation and Christianity was also found in other movements that emerged from the esoteric milieu of the time, such as the theosophically influenced liberal Catholic Church and the anthroposophically inspired Christengemeinschaft. The spiritualism developed earlier by Allan Kardec here in Paris and referred to as Spiritism is another example. Kardec's belief in reincarnation had a long prehistory in France, where the influx of Hindu ideas via French translations of the Bhagavad Gita was coupled with romantic socialism. Generally, despite the Indian influence, reincarnation was incorporated into an explicitly Christian framework in 19th century France. Here, it could to an extent resolve the theodicy problem, with Hindu ideas about karma invoked to explain suffering on earth. When Kardec argued for the veracity of reincarnation, he referred explicitly to both Pythagoras and Hinduism. In the Edelweiss Society, however, the influence from South Asian religion was less direct, or at least less openly displayed. In French Spiritism, the soul was moreover perceived as sexless and being able to reincarnate in alternating male or female bodies, much like in Theosophy or in the thinking of Hilma of Klint. Edelweiss' understanding of reincarnation did not share this queer tendency. That is, the soul was not seen as androgynous, but stably and permanently gendered. Through collections among the members, capital was accumulated for the construction of a permanent Edelweiss headquarter. An engineer named Erik Bergendahl was commissioned to draw up plans for a temple building and presented a grandiose proposal in April 1909. But the years passed without much being done to realize it. In 1923, the Fock family moved to Grev Turegatan 68, a property that a member had donated to the Edelweiss Society. Here, they finally obtained a permanent place to gather, albeit on a much less ambitious scale than in Bergendahl's drawings. It was the old stable in the courtyard that was now converted into a chapel. A scandal struck the family in 1920 when Huldine's daughter Karin left her husband Nils von Kantzow for the handsome German pilot Hermann Göring, who at the time was living in Sweden. Karin's passionate infatuation was naturally completely at odds with the self-control and ascetic chastity advocated by the Edelweiss Society. But despite this fact, the couple were often together in the chapel. When Huldine died in 1931, she had led the Edelweiss Society for 40 years. Only a month after her passing, Karin also died from a hereditary heart condition. Her wake was held in the Edelweiss Chapel, and Göring maintained contact with his wife's family for the rest of his life. He told his stepson, Thomas von Kantzow, a devoted Edelweiss member, that on New Year's Eve after her death, he had seen a mysterious glow of light 3 times and heard a voice calling his name. Göring had evidently been influenced by Karin's ideas about the spirit world. Karin's sister Elsa had remained unmarried, which was probably why her mother appointed her as successor. But only a year later, Elsa too died and was succeeded by the third sister, Mary von Rosen. Republishing her mother's work, she removed all references to reincarnation and women priests, and managed to get a Church of Sweden bishop to re-inaugurate the Edelweiss Chapel. Interestingly, Mary von Rosen not only led the Edelweiss Society, but was also one of the leaders of a high church movement centered around Swedish medieval mystic Saint Bridget. Let us now turn to the role of mysticism in the Edelweiss Society. The idea of studying some sort of pure, unmediated form of mystical experience has been under heavy criticism since the 1970s work of historian of Judaism Stephen Katz, who argued that such supposed experiences are intrinsically bound up with interpretation as soon as they are articulated. Historian of religions Olav Hammer has stated that a mystic is simply someone who manages to convince others they have had some sort of exotic experience that can serve as the basis of religious authority. The focus in mysticism research on experience as such, rather than on social formations around such claims, therefore neglects what is, according to Hammer, of actual relevance to the history of religions. The recurring topoi regarding direct mystical encounters with a transcendent reality are often employed and articulated in response to power formations in institutionalized religion. For example, it can quite obviously become a way to circumvent the authority of theological tradition. Thus, when Huldine Fock claims that Paul has been given an undeserved status in Christianity, and that his ideas about the place of women are erroneous, she does this drawing on the legitimacy offered by direct mystical access to the transcendent realm. This can be traced all the way back to the prehistory of the group. Large portions of the Edelweiss worldview are in fact present already in an 1886 book by Berta Valerius. In this case, it is the spirits communicating with Valerius that claim to have had direct encounters with Christ or God, in what they explicitly describe as a form of ecstasy, what we can perhaps call a form of mystical experiences by proxy, or mediated mysticism. Here, there's also an emphasis on ineffability, familiar from classical definitions of mysticism. There are moreover passages in Valerius's book indicating ideas about an increasing direct access to the most holy, that is, the realm of God, not only for spirits, but also for living humans. In the speech Huldine Beamish gave on the inauguration of the society, the ultimate goal was formulated as direct experience of God. Quote, "Only the pure of heart shall reach the aim and behold God." End quote. And indeed, her daughter, Huldine Fock, would later claim such direct access, writing that she had, quote, partially been allowed to gaze into God's judgments up there above the light of the stars, end quote. Interestingly, Huldine Beamish identified strongly with the medieval mystic Saint Catherine of Siena, while the later leader Mary von Rosen was strongly attracted to the medieval Swedish mystic Saint Bridget, thus framing the society's activities both at the start and at the end of its trajectory as standing in a mystical lineage. An abbess in Siena is supposed to have said to Huldine Beamish, I shall pray to God that he makes you a new Catherine. Huldine also presented her own interpretation of Catherine in a Swedish newspaper in April 1892, waxing lyrical about a visit to the saint's home and displaying a clear identification with her as a sort of mystical role model. In her texts, Huldine Beamish does not describe herself as a mystic, but, drawing on the authority of biblical narratives, refers recurringly to the parallels between spiritualists and prophets, in a sense that has much the same implications, emphasizing that both, quote, stand in direct connection with heavenly powers, end quote. As we have seen, claims of immediate access to the transcendent realm was employed by Edelweiss leaders to circumvent key theological positions in the Church of Sweden. However, such assertions of mystical consciousness started to become gradually de-emphasized at the point when the Edelweiss Society began a process of reintegration into more conventional forms of Church of Sweden Christianity in the 1930s. Thank you.
So let's finish with this final roundtable with Pascal and Arthur, Arthur Gillet, Pascal Rousseau, and connecting this roundtable with the actual exhibition, very close from here, from this auditorium at the other entrance of the Grand Palais. What I would like to do is to, of course, to give the micro to Pascal to introduce and to explain a bit what happened during this past few months, or at least during the opening of the exhibition, and how it was an important moment for Paris and France to host one of the first retrospective of Hilma af Klint work here in Paris. And after we'll continue and introduce the work of Arthur Gillet, who's been creating all the different pieces that you have behind behind us at the entrance of the exhibition. And I have to warn you, most of the photos that I'm going to show you are mine. I just saw the exhibition a few days ago and I took pictures for this roundtable. So excuse my maybe not very well high quality photo. So Pascal, can you maybe tell a bit about the history of this exhibition?
So about the exhibition. First, the exhibition, I was invited by the Grand Palais to do a large retrospective first. But we were in a specific moment for the Grand Palais because the Grand Palais was collaborating with the Centre Pompidou, le Musée National d'Art Moderne, and as you know, the Musée National d'Art Moderne is closed for the moment, and is using the space of Grand Palais to produce exhibitions. So they decided to do a large, not retrospective, but exhibition of the last Matisse in the large galleries. So it was a reconsideration of the project. You know, I needed to concentrate on two galleries. It was a reduction of the middle of the exhibition. So I decided to concentrate and focus on what we know now of Hilma af Klint as a modern artist, the Temple series. The Temple series, you know that it's a large project from 1906 until 1915 years, very important for the historiography of modernism. It's evident. It's the moment of the development of cubism until the first step of abstraction. So I think that it was more interesting to present the disruptive aspect of Hilma af Klint in Paris, and for that, to avoid all the academic, the presentation of all the academics works from the education process, and to focus immediately on the temple series with an introduction with the spirit drawings and a contextualization of that spiritualism inspiration from the beginning of abstraction. She shared with Mondrian, Kandinsky, and others. So that exhibition was after the large retrospective of 2013, organized by the Modern Museum with the tour. It was a tour with Berlin, Malaga. It was not Madrid. So it was a little peripheral, cities, but it was seminal and very important for the reconsideration and the international visibility of Hilma af Klint. You know the story. 5 years later, it was the large retrospective in Guggenheim. 6 months for the blockbuster moment. So after the blockbuster and after that moment, I think that we enter now probably in a new moment for the reconsideration of the Hilma af Klint collaboration and work. And with the Paris exhibition, I wanted to focus more on the gender aspect. It's why I use, for example, colors and some not girly but sensual colors for the walls, for example, in contrast with the more formalist and modernist tradition like the Guggenheim effect. The Guggenheim exhibition was perfect with the spiral architecture. It was fantastic, and I think that it was part also of the success. It was unexpected. Even the Guggenheim museum staff didn't believe of such a success. It was for a 3 months exhibition, and they decided to extend to 6 months. It was the public who decided that Hilma af Klint and all the group was necessary to be present for the future, or for the present of the future. So now I think that we are entering, after that first moment, it was the necessary reconsideration of Hilma af Klint to remap the historiography of abstraction. So after the exhibition in London, Mondrian, Hilma af Klint, after the exhibition in Düsseldorf by Julia and Daniel about Kandinsky and Hilma af Klint, I think that we have to reconsider in a new manner why she's so expecting by the contemporary public. I think that the new step is not to understand why she was so modern for her time, but was she so contemporary for our time. And it's why more biographical aspect, more precise analysis of all the symbolic, imaginary, and the combination between popular and high culture and all that mixture, so postmodern, is important to understand the contemporary aspect of Hilma af Klint. It's why I decided to invite a young French artist for the entrance of the exhibition to insist on the dialogue between Hilma with the contemporary art scene. It was not a literal dialogue. It was not a formal dialogue. Arthur Gillet is not using, the formal vocabulary of Hilma af Klint, but it was a very closed connection. And I think that the close connection are explaining also the success of Hilma af Klint in the contemporary art scenes. So, for example, why I decided to invite Arthur Gillet. Arthur Gillet has for that project two characteristics. When he was a student in Les Beaux-Arts de Rennes, he was very female. So you have a female aspect, and you assume that female aspect. And during your education in the Beaux-Arts, you transform totally your identity, visual identity. So it's about the transformative process with identity, gender fluid, and so on. First, coincidence with the Hilma af Klint imaginary. But a second aspect is that Arthur Gillet is coda. Coda. So it's an anagram, it's an English anagram for child of deaf adult. So both parents of Arthur Gillet were deaf, malentendant, sourd. So when he was 7 or 8, he had to translate, to transcribe, the signs, the language of the deaf language, but also to help his parents to dialogue with ANP, with administrative structure. So all about, the transcription, translation, transduction from one word to another word. So it was quite interesting. So it's why I decided that it was probably a good idea to invite Arthur Gillet to introduce, like visually, people in the world of Hilma, and to introduce the public in a more current manner, more contemporary manner. And if you want to talk about that.
Mm-hmm. Hello. I'm Arthur Gillet. As Pascal said, I'm a coda, a child of deaf adult. And we also have to take in consideration that in France and in most European countries, there was a banishment of the sign language from 1880 to 2005 in France. So basically, sign language was forbidden, was seen as something shameful that would stigmatize people as disabled. So my parents didn't want me to learn sign language. Especially my father, and so they wanted me to integrate better into the hearing society. And I would say it wasn't really successful in a way. All my family, we had like a lot of issues with school, with learning, and it repeated a social background that my parents already had. So it's more about, it's not about the disability itself, it's more about the rupture of transmission of language between families, because actually, if you look into it, you have researchers like Nadine Clairbeau or Alain Bacci who will notice that even in families where immigrating parents doesn't speak the language of a country and doesn't want to learn the language to their children, who have actually the same issues with school, having kids who would gain a taste for, let's say, transgression, which I did a lot, quite. So, that's I don't know. Oh, okay, it's coming. Anyway, we'll see. But so I've been working a lot of these aspects. Also, one aspect we actually almost touched today was the schizophrenia, or what was maybe perceived from Hilma af Klint as schizophrenia. And someone said that she didn't want it to diagnose her, and I think that surely would be correct to not do it. But to me, schizophrenia is something very interesting. My father was actually diagnosed with schizophrenia, and the combination of deafness and schizophrenia, like you can't hear voice, but you actually hear voice at the same time, is a paradox that I've been moving a lot the science during the end of the 19th century and whole the 20th century, to know if schizophrenia is coming from the brain or if it's something that is more psychological, and America and Europe has a different approach about that. But it put me anyway in a kind of every time interpretative mode with my parents, and even recently that's pictures. No, ça marche comme. Okay, so this is a part of a fresco I did, which is 23 meters long, based on it's a silk painting, as you've seen in the show, and it's based on interview I did with my mother. And then I recollected from what she told me, very common experiences I found with other codas, other deaf parents in books or just meeting them. And I tried to make this kind of story that is so 23 meters long. At the end, I asked my mother to talk in front of the fresco and walking to tell her own version of the story. Because to me, I always have been the one who was translating for her, and I wanted for once that she was the one who take place again in talking instead of my place. Well, that's not what happening today, sadly, but there is a good video about it. And I asked her to do it in sign language, which is, as I told you, a language that I don't master perfectly. So I was trying to, every time I was seeing her talking, I was like, do I understand really what she says? Like, was it that bad? Or this kind of stuff. And I asked to an interpreter to translate the video. And when we received the subtitles, like, it struck me to realize that I understood, but I've been in doubt my whole life about what my parents were telling me. And that, of course, did something to my heart as well. Like, and I Hilma of Klint to me was very important when I discovered her, because what I saw in her is the need to make significant something, but maybe she doesn't know yet what she was saying, what she was painting. And so this is actually it's a whole process that will make very close to psychoanalysis, where you have this acte manqué, you have the dreams, you have these things that you have to interpret the everything you refoulé, I don't know how to say that. Repressed, everything you repress, and then it's gonna come back in a way or another, and you have to interpret that. And so to me, especially because it was also with my parents, this psychoanalysis, let's say, symmetry with the work of Hilma of Klint was very important to me. Oh no. Okay. Yes, okay, I got it. So that's, I've been also working a lot with the Annunciation theme in paintings, because to me Annunciation is the primordial scene of translation in art history, because you have something invisible at the top that needs to be understood by Mary here. And for that it needs a translator which is basically just an image. It is reduced to something that is not really feminine or masculine, that is not a kid, that is not an adult. It's reduced to the minimum as any interpreter should be, in a way. So the figure of the angel for that was very fitting, I would say, for this role. And here it was a scene that my mother told me then. When I was 10 years old, I had to call ANPE is a kind of, this kind of desk to find jobs when you were unemployed. And they asked her to call to find a job, but obviously she couldn't. So they insisted that she could ask her son, that was 10 at the time. So that's what happened. And it didn't work, by the way. So yeah, I was putting this annexation thing, which is in a triangle shape. And to me, that was very kind of annunciating, if I can say, about how technologies would work in the end. And for this painting, it's a painting of copper, because I also like to paint on copper. Copper is I wanted to replace gold by copper. Copper is... gold was where the divine was supposed to be. It would be the sky in the medieval painting. And I replaced it by copper, which is the material we use to circulate electricity or information through television, through telephone, through this kind of thing. So to me, it was very fitting to use that. I reserved the screen of the television, and it's only the copper that you can see with the rays that are connected to the children here. It's based on a picture of my apartment when I was this age. So I made also paintings of wood, such as this one, that is a kind of play with this theme as well. You have also a computer that I had when I was a kid. This is a visible speech. It's Alexander Graham Bell was also a coda. It's an inventor also of the telephone. He had his parents were deaf. He was married to a wife who was deaf as well. And there was, at the end of the 19th century, this kind of hope that science will resolve everything. It kind of replaced religion, you could say, and he wanted to create a machine that would be able to transform the vibration of the throat into a voice. Sadly, it didn't work, and it became the telephone, which was actually the worst ever for deaf people. And when he died, on his testimony, he said that what he was the most proud of was visible speech, which is actually this. It's to make deaf people understand visually how invisible processes can work. So this was at the school of my mother. It was a convent because deaf kids were put into religious institutions outside of Paris. This is La Chartreuse Dorée. And they had all these technologies trying to make them hear, trying to make them understand. It wasn't really working. So you have this drawing of Betty G. Miller, a deaf artist from America. And it shows that also they were trying really to erase the sign language by then and force them to hear through technologies which were hurtful and not very functioning. Okay, so this is this piece is a recollection of archives I did with my mother through her own stuff. And you have, for example, the books that my grandmother had to raise my mother. And it says, the education of the deaf kid. This kid will be like any other. He will hear, he will speak. So, good luck with that. And some years later, you have in the newspaper, she kept that also, a newspaper of Brittany, where I grew up, deaf, young deaf, the Paris, comment on pourrait dire ça? The challenge of integration, that would be the translation. So yeah. This is another newspaper she had article, and it was in the 2000s, I believe, that's saying, yes, be deaf and be a nurse, it's possible. So, because back then, if you were deaf, you will only be a cleaner or a factory worker. So, this goes to this this panel I made towards this attempt of oralization that brought huge illiteracy for deaf people. It's about 80% in 95. And I chose to portray this education and language as something that could be also violent. So I grew up also with this kind of books at home, and it's all based on hands, facial expression, but also horrors. So I was like questioning what the horror could mean. And it actually before you had this finger pointed with la manicule, which was replaced in the 18th century by the harrow you see there. And the harrow is actually a weapon. So it's made to target someone and to hurt him, not to like make peace through conversation. So you see the tower, for example. The tower as a tarot card is based on the Tower of Babel, by the way. And this way you see this harrow destroying the tower, and that tower was supposed to destroy also a unique language between societies. So I thought it was interesting. Maybe I should go a bit faster. No, it's good. We have to finish. We have to finish? Okay. Well, these are other paintings I did on wood. This was a catalogue of that my mother had in high school for deaf people. It's a very Christian one. And up there, it's my sister trying to kill my mother. She seems very happy about it. This is a certificate about my mother. It was like the best certificate we could have back then for a deaf woman, and it's a certificate of domestic hearts. So also good luck with that. These are chairs I made. Another type of installation I made. It's based on this deaf artist, Christopher de Prédis. It's supposed to represent a university. And decided to repaint it that way. You have like this character in the center that is transgressing the walls, kind of, but it still remain in prison somehow. But yeah, there's many stuff to say. So,
so one question, a very simple question. What kind of interest you have to Hilma? What kind of works you prefer, for example? What have you found in the exhibition or in the catalogue you consult?
My favorite paintings are, I mean, there's, I really liked I would say it's not maybe answering exactly, but the parallel between the decorative arts and mixed with the guts researches to create this kind of religious, but also it was, to me, mixed between religious and scientific at the same time. I was also very interested into the tale of the two swans, where there is this, to me, it seemed to be connected to the First World War as well at some point. And I was very interesting to see that something that could be considered very poetic could be also very, very real somehow. And so these are like the series of the swans for me are maybe the ones that really I keep in mind.
And to decipher, for example, the letters, have you been fascinated by the letters, by the words, the signification of the words? Because as you are immediately in your personal life, confronted with the translation. So how did you see the secret language of the flowers, but also of the codification of the letters?
Well, yeah, that was interesting to me, those letters, to try to interpret them. I really wanted to, I was at first trying really to understand exactly something, as if I was reading a dictionary. And then after a while, I thought it was maybe more interesting to remain in this in between, where I could maybe put a meaning on that, but still remain unsure about them. And actually, this aspect reminded me of something that is very important to me in my own research is this story about, we mentioned hieroglyphs at some point, and actually hieroglyphs back then were interpreted as something purely decorative. And Champollion, who understood that it was a language, actually did it because he met l'Abbé de l'Épée in the 18th century. L'Abbé de l'Épée was the one who created the French Sign Language and the French Institute for Deaf Kids in the middle of the 18th century. And seeing the deaf people communicating in such a figurative way apparently helped him to realize that it could be a language. So. And that to me, that also was the way I tried also not to be too literal about that. It was quite difficult, I have to say. I really wanted to take them, and at the same time, I chose to avoid it. Generally, I always have this phase in my work when I want to put words, but finally I put them away. And I think I want to remain as much figurative as possible to kind of create this kind of universal language. Yeah.
I have just maybe one question also. How would you explain the shape of the flags, or the different, way of knowing that the exhibition is at the end of the different pieces that you've been hanging, and it is something that you already made in other exhibitions as well. This shape, the textiles first, of course, but the I would say the flag, but it's not exactly a flag, but something hang in the space.
So you ask me,
what do you say about the shape or the installation that you made for this exhibition here?
Yeah, the shape. I wanted to do that circle still, because to me that was a very important aspect. Well. Okay, so that was me in fine arts school, for example. And that's when I won a cosplay contest in Brittany as a Sailor Venus, just so you know. Okay, that's... And that's my mother in front of the fabric. Yeah, this one. Yeah, the other one is shaped as really as a rectangle, because I wanted to have this feeling that you pass through a kind of cortege to enter the exhibition. Cortege, sorry, I don't have the word. Kind of a procession, let's say, and you have all these images that go one after one. It allowed me also to create a more I miss the word. Something that seems like connected to each other one, like if you have the same exactly format. And the circle one is actually it's a more complicated story. I wanted the circle because circle is a more magical shape, and was well, it's quite a long story actually. Should I say? Well, time. Okay, sorry. So actually, the man you see here is a painter named Salman Nawati. Is from Gaza. Is someone I met at Cité des Arts in 2021, and I actually made this. I first did a chasuble with, by the way, an exhibition we did, and because I was invited to go into the desert of Sodom. And I realized actually the Mount Sodom was actually somewhere on a map. So I wanted to do a pilgrimage there. And so it's me on the top of the Mount Sodom, sleeping there. And I wanted to go back to this pilgrimage that we were doing in the more antique, let's say, traditions, where you would go into a natural place to find a connection with a god that would be connected to that place, and he would come in dreams, giving you advice, cure, or anything. And there's some psychanalysts that think that's the beginning of psychoanalysis, by the way. But when I slept there, there was a lot of drones that was flying upon. And then I was feeling like it was missing something to this pattern that was describing the three states of the Mont Sodom. It's the sunset, the night, and the sunrise. And I've been talking a lot with Salman, who told me a lot about the drone that was flying also in Gaza. And that's him, Salman, by the way, when you had short hair. And he told me basically the same thing, that this piece of Jeremy Daller, that he was constantly disturbed in his sleep by the drones, and that he was always scared. Now he's living in Sweden, by the way. And so I tried to make this piece as a circle, so he could find peace again in his sleep. Yeah.
Thank you very much for this presentation, for both the exhibition and the presentation of your work. I don't know if we are open to questions, but I think we are kind of running late. It's already 5:40. I don't know if you have any questions for Pascal or Arthur. No question? But if there is no question, I would like maybe to conclude with Pascal and Ariane this study day, very rich and very stimulating study days. Thank you very much to all the different speakers that are, some of them are still here and some of them already left, for giving us all of them very interesting and very stimulating speeches. And thank you to the audience that has been here from the beginning to the end, even though the less people, I would say, at the beginning of this morning. Thank you to all of you for following this study day, mainly only in English. And of course, we highly encourage you, if you haven't seen it, to visit the exhibition of Hilma af Klint. Thank you.
And don't forget that there is quasi a weekend. So tomorrow on Saturday we will have a performance by Claire Auden-Cobertin. Normally a 12 hours performance, live performance, but it was restricted by the Ligue des Nations. You know, the Grand Palais has to close before because we have some fears. La préfecture de police a demandé la fermeture prématurée du Grand Palais. On Sunday, we will have a talk on eco-spirituality with Emmanuel Ecochia, a member of the Francis Allais Foundation. We will have a talk with filmmakers in connection with Hilma. Tomorrow we will have a presentation of the documentary that Manuel Blanc made for Arte TV. So a large program. You can have that program on the Grand Palais website. So you are welcome all that weekend. It's the Hilma & Co weekend. Thank you very much.